Greetings and welcome to the inaugural Upcycling Summit brought to you by NAISMA and Invasive Impact Initiatives. My name is Tegan Wilmot and I am the Education and Prevention Manager here at NAISMA. Please say hello in the chat and share with us where you are watching from. This event, co-hosted with Invasive Impact Initiatives, has brought together change makers who are transforming invasive species into useful, sustainable products by collaborating with local invasive experts. They're also educating communities about the ecological damage invasive species cause and inspiring new approaches to environmental care. We are really excited to see so many of you here today, and we have some great presentations lined up. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about NAISMA for those of you that don't know us well. NAISMA, the North American Invasive Species Management Association, is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to empower invasive species management across North America. We are here to serve members in the professional and academic world who work on invasive species. We have 18 board members and 10 active committees who support our programming, and we have 7 team members and a membership that continues to grow every day. We communicate with over 15,000 subscribers and interact with over 38,000 social media followers. During National Invasive Species Awareness Week, we are able to extend that reach to over 3.4 million people. So what do we do? Well, NAISMA provides the connection, the tools, and the voice you need to address invasive species. We frame our programs around these core pillars. We work hard to provide opportunities for collaboration and connection through our webinars, summits, and annual conference. We provide a collective voice on a national platform to advocate for relevance and support through our government relations program and National Invasive Species Awareness Week. And we equip our membership with the tools needed to manage and educate the public about invasive species through Play Clean Go, the NAISMA Shop, our certified weed-free products program, mapping data standards, and NAISMA Academy. An event you won't want to miss is the 2025 NAISMA Annual Conference. Mark your calendar and plan to join us in Lake Tahoe from November 3rd through 6th. Our theme this year is charting a new course, and we have some great speakers lined up already and hope to see you there. Head to naisma.org to register today. We also have a great lineup of free monthly webinars this year. Next month, we'll have a panel discussing efforts to combat invasive species to protect unique island ecosystems. And then in October, a week earlier than usual, we'll have Dr. Lynch presenting on lessons learned from managing the polyphagous shot-hole borer in California and how they are being applied to manage and respond to this species in Western Australia. You can visit naisma.org to learn more and register. We are also partnering again with RISC this year to host the Invasive Species and Climate Change Conference on December 9th and 10th. This is a free virtual conference, and this year's theme is Better Together, Empowering People and Partnerships. This event was a huge success last year, and we are very excited to be hosting it again. And you can again register at our website or by scanning this QR code. As a friendly reminder, your membership dues help to fund our educational programs like this webinar. If you are not currently a member, we offer a variety of different membership options, and you can view those on our website. If you'd like to sponsor NAISMA in a bigger way, our new Premier Partner program is designed for you. Premier Partners enjoy benefits throughout the year, including acknowledgement on our website, at events, and more. And we'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our 2025 Premier Partners, supporting agencies, and foundations whose generosity helps to make events like this webinar possible. Before we get started with the main event, I would like to welcome Chris Dionigi, NAISMA Board President, to give some opening remarks.
Thank you, Tegan. My name is Chris Dionigi, and it is my privilege to serve as the President of the Board of Directors of NAISMA. Thank you for joining us today. Invasive species are plants, animals, and microorganisms that have been moved either by intentional human action or unintentionally as hitchhikers to areas outside of their native ranges. While most non-native species are not problematic, some species can grow out of balance with their local plant and animal communities. This imbalance can lead to serious harm, such as reduced habitat quality and weakened ecosystem resilience. Invasive species can be found in nearly every type of ecosystem, from forests, lakes, fields, rivers, oceans, croplands, and even in our homes. Some also pose direct risks to human health. I'm proud to be a member of NAISMA. Our mission is to empower people who are working carefully to achieve real and lasting results. If you're not already a member, I encourage you to join us. And please consider donating to NAISMA. I can assure you that your contributions will be used responsibly and effectively to support invasive species management. Because invasive species affect so many aspects of our environment, supporting NAISMA also means that you are supporting many other conservation and preservation efforts. While invasive species can be anywhere, they're not everywhere. With careful, sustained management, ecosystems can recover. I like to say that invasive species is one problem with 1,000 solutions. Today, we'll explore one of those solutions. We'll learn about upcycling invasive species, a powerful and creative approach that both raises awareness and inspires action. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate you being with us today. And then I'd like to show everyone our agenda here. So we are going to start out by hearing about what is invasive species upcycling. And then we've divided our day into 3 sections. After each section, we will have a brief question and answer period and a break. So for everyone watching, I do want to request that you include the name of the presenter if possible when entering your questions in the Q&A box. That will help us keep track of those. And if you see a question that has already been asked that you like, you can give it a thumbs up to promote it to the top of the list as well. And so to get us started with our main event today, I would like to introduce you to Lorena James to provide an overview of what is invasive species upcycling. Lorena is an ecopreneur and founder of Invasive Impact Initiatives, a youth-led platform dedicated to uplifting and connecting invasive species upcyclers worldwide. Based between Buffalo, New York, and Charlotte, North Carolina, Lorena builds networks, resources, and public awareness to transform ecological challenges into creative environmental solutions. Through workshops, toolkits, and storytelling, she amplifies voices in the invasive upcycling community, highlighting innovations from art supplies to regenerative materials. Her work centers on collaboration, circularity, and intergenerational learning, fostering a global community, restoring ecosystems, and reimagining our relationship with nature. So thank you for helping organize this event, Lorena. I'd like you to take it away.
Thank you, Tegan. I appreciate that. And so you should see here, starting off with a pausing for a land acknowledgement before we begin. Across the world, Indigenous communities have cared for lands, waters, and ecosystems for generations, and their knowledge and stewardship continues to guide us. As Invasive Impact Initiatives works across borders, we commit to listening, learning, and collaborating with Indigenous peoples in ways that honor and respect their leadership in ecological restoration. So currently, I'm in Buffalo, New York, on the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee peoples. So we really wanted to start our summit with that message. But first, the great question for why we're all here today: what do we mean exactly by invasive species upcycling? In simple terms, it's about taking something harmful and turning it into something helpful. We use a framework called Earth, Ecology, Arts, Research, Technology, and Heritage. And by combining these elements, we're not just removing invasive species, but we're repurposing them into materials, tools, and stories that support ecosystem recovery and community resilience. Our motto at Invasive Impact is remove, repurpose, restore. Removal is critical. Invasive species are one of the leading threats to biodiversity worldwide. But if we stop at just removal, we miss an opportunity. Repurposing allows us to give these materials unexpected educational and economic value, whether that's as art supplies, building materials, or even 3D printing filament. And ultimately, the goal is restoration, creating space for native ecosystems and cultural connections to thrive. So from workshops we've hosted to hackathons we've hosted, we bring this vision to life through virtual and in-person events. So this is a quick snapshot of the invasive impact community across North America. Each point on this map represents individuals and organizations experimenting with new ways to use invasive plants, animals, and byproducts, from artisans turning kudzu into baskets to scientists transforming mussel shells into bioplastics. We're creating a shared learning community that stretches across borders and disciplines. So a little bit about my personal journey in this work. I would not be working as an environmentalist today if it was not for invasive species. In high school, I won a hackathon with this crazy idea, turning invasive zebra and quagga mussel shells into 3D printing filament. And after receiving grant funding, I was able to apply for a patent and even took this work abroad as a student and young professional in China. 8 years later, now I still have this passion for invasive species upcycling and built Invasive Impact to support others engaged in this meaningful work. So what exactly do we do at Invasive Impact? We host workshops, we host educational programming like this one you're attending today, engage with invasive upcycled product sales and development, offer environmental communications consulting, and have an ambassador program where we share materials on how to responsibly upcycle invasive species to a global audience in order to collaborate with conservation organizations. But I think at the core of what we do is uplifting other upcyclers. So we really work to make meaningful, lasting impact as artists, scientists, and ecopreneurs. We must work together and collaborate to create this impact. So you will recognize some faces in here. Coming up, we'll hear from two of these upcyclers shown, Joshua with Invasive Art Initiative and Sydney with Green Revival. And we're really excited to get this conversation going. We're really excited to get connected. Feel free to follow our work via our website at invasiveimpact.org. And we are going to jump into the very first session of the day. Our first session will explore the powerful role of art in shifting how we think about invasive species. Artists are taking what many see as ecological waste and transforming it into tools for connection, creativity, and education. Through their work, invasive plants become materials for pencils, papers, sculptures, and installations, sparking conversations about ecology, culture, and community. These projects remind us that art doesn't just reflect the world, it has the power to reshape our relationship with it. So our first speaker today is Joshua Ralph. Joshua is a community-engaged eco-artist and facilitator, originally from Treaty 2 territory of mixed English, Scottish, and Métis heritage, based on the unceded lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsutsuwatho nations. They leave Invasive Art Initiative, a traveling project that transforms invasive plant species into art supplies like pencils, inks, soaps, and paper, intertwining ecology and creative expression. Their work, rooted in care for changing ecology, spans workshops, field restoration, and public outreach. Joshua has collaborated with numerous environmental groups, facilitated public speaking events, and gained recognition for innovative environmental outreach. Joshua will be presenting on collaborations across continents, what invasive plants teach about community and art. And you may now share your slides, Joshua.
Thank you, Lorena, for the wonderful introduction. Really appreciate it. Just reinstate super quickly, my name is Joshua Ralph. My mother is Doris Corden, and my father is Alexander Ralph. I come from Scottish, English, Métis, and French ancestry. I am a settler. I was born on Treaty 2 territory in southern Manitoba, but I largely grew up on Treaty 6 lands north of what's colonially known as Edmonton. I am also an uninvited guest today on the stolen lands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This is me on the left. The right is my first other than human participant to one of my workshops. We have a crow here that was very eager to learn about how to make paper. So before diving in fully, I can talk about relationality and other ways of knowing, but to not work within those frameworks ethically, meaning with respect to Indigenous perspectives and knowledges, would be another way of appropriation, which is not what I'm here today to do. In stepping out from these very white-centric viewpoints I'd grown up around, removed from the lands of my ancestors on either side of my family, who called lands home, it would be a disservice for myself not to note that there can be lines drawn from my own more recent learnings and educating myself that made way for these relationships that I endeavor to foster with these plants, these invasive species. My journey in this invasive species / art space really started in 2021. Wildfires were raging the interior of the province of BC, where I currently have laid a bit of a shallow root system. carbon dioxide parts per million hit 417.7, and I had just finished my undergrad a few months prior. I was watching this ecological destruction essentially unfold, and I decided to take action in my community to quell these growing concerns and just do better by the environment that I shared. At the time, this came to be seen through as removing invasive plants around my neighborhood and green spaces. This is a practice that normally goes by the name of environmental restoration, taking an environment back to some other point in history, generally pre-colonial. I did this for many years and really began reflecting on my relationships to space and to these plants that I was so willingly and eagerly uprooting and killing while being told that I was protecting others. I'm going to jump around here just for a second. I so often heard growing up that nature depended upon this delicate balance. Animals eat plants, plants eat sunlight. The more greenery you see, the better the environment is faring. And I'm not here to shoot that down, really. I'm here to talk about engagements and relations and of stories. So speaking of stories, with headlines like these, we got alien species invading Antarctica. Zebra mussels are a threat to the water system. One can come to the very reasonable conclusion that these species are doing harm, and they are. These beings are considered invasive relative to their relationship to humans, to time, and to space. This is a case of human language being used to compartmentalize how people, or rather certain people, see these interrelationships being played out. Are these plants that damage infrastructure? Maybe these are plants that aren't from quote unquote here, but overcrowd other plants. Maybe they poison livestock. And due to these factors, rightfully so, the language used around invasive plants is that they're bad and that they're aliens. Invasive species, duly though, are also the story of migration. A story often of reminders of someone's homeland brought across the sea, of grandma's favorite ingredient in her cooking, or of plants just growing where their seeds have sprouted. And with that, I ask, where would conservation be if it weren't for stories? We've got Leopold and Carson, and more recently, Kimmerer, bringing the public together on ecological awareness through storytelling and through this very same knowledge sharing. Regarding my own story, though, I was coming away from these environmental restoration sites being met with this massive pile of dying plant material. Anyone who's done this work is probably very familiar. This is all queued up to get sent to the incinerator, as is the case of the city of Vancouver. It was not a good relationship that I was holding with these plants. So I've got a little bit of a background. Pretty much all my life, I've only ever done art, environmental work, or developing recreation programming for community. And I thought to myself, how do I hodgepodge all three of these? I wanted to find ways to do good by these plants who live in these same spaces that I do. I began experimenting with their materiality and making art supplies. This very quickly branched into community engagements with these collaborations between the plant neighbors and myself, and just of sharing these stories, who they are and how they got here. There really just wasn't a reason for me to keep these experiments to myself, not with how many invasives are being removed by community groups. I began teaching how to make paper and inks and charcoal and cordage and printmaking and all these supplies for creative expression from these very same invasive plants getting uprooted across parks on the daily. In this, I came to the realization that I was working with these beings, often seen as being out of place with the land, to facilitate a closer connection to the land. I can't speak for the plants, but I can only hope this is some form of respectful relation to them. The longer I have been engaging in this practice and outreach with this project that has come to be known as the Invasive Art Initiative, I have realized the honor that I had in fostering to bring community and friends closer to their immediate ecosystems. These weren't native species and invasive species duking it out, or an Amazon rainforest thousands and thousands of kilometers away. This was happening here, just wherever here might be for you. I also in this work, begin to wonder how individuals can recontextualize this relationship with invasive plants that can at least endeavor to respect life, to both bear witness to the biodiversity crisis that we're going through together and act in accordance, but to do that treading with respect. Can we know and name these species and their stories, or are they just being removed from the soil for bad behavior in an ecosystem that they didn't evolve within? What creative solutions are out there for engaging within our communities about the impact of invasives while also engaging with the plants that have come to likewise call these spaces home? In this intersection between ecology and art, what can be made of collaboration? This has been bringing arts to the doors of people who are more ecologically minded and ecology to the forefront of artists' minds. I sometimes get asked, like, why art is this specific approach to what I'm doing. And for that, I have this quote at the bottom of the page here that Bertolt Brecht, art is not a mirror to hold up to society, but a mirror by which to shape it. Is just to ask, how can we as a society relearn a new relationship? I'll start by finishing off a little bit by offering a few questions to mull over. Is how do we love who shares our spaces now along with what has been lost? What do we make of this ever-changing vision of nature that inherently and very probably in perpetuity includes the lives of invasive plants and animals? What is our role and responsibility in this relationship as naturalists, as artists, as educators, or just as human beings? And what do we owe to the plants and animals, whether invasive or otherwise? So I don't like talking about this too much. Some people really like facts and figures, so I'll leave it up. This is the things that I've had the privilege of facilitating and people that I've worked alongside in different communities since 2021, thereabouts. I also realized I got these locations ranging from Metro Vancouver, Gibsons, Victoria. Anyone who happens to be familiar with the Lower Mainland and British Columbia, realize those locations aren't very far apart from each other, but as someone who is carless, I swear these are all-day trips. And do take me a bit of time. I had project pictures sporadically just throughout the presentation, but I also wanted to take a specific moment here to appreciate this incredibly beautiful art that comes out of these workshops that the participants produce. These are all made with a base of regionally invasive plants, harvested from local environmental restoration sites that I have likewise had the privilege of building relationships with. We've got some invasive species paper here in the top left. We've got some tansy and creeping buttercup and reed canary grass mixed in. Anything with this charcoal on it is being made with black locust. And one of my favorites here, this second to the left on the top, is an invasive pumpkin seed fish. It's a little bit meta. We've got two invasives on the same piece of paper there. Got some keychains and recently been sort of diving into printmaking as well with another piece of tansy there in the bottom right. For artists in the crowd, though, they maybe know that so many art materials come packed in plastic wrap, or even just like a pen is 98% petroleum product. And I kind of just ask at the end of the day, can at least some of this waste be removed from the equation if we are able to foster deeper rooted connections to our art materials themselves and to these ecosystems that we find ourselves living within? I wanted to say a huge thank you for the time today, for NAISMA and everybody here, and for those who have helped support the project throughout the years, including funders and numerous volunteers and people who just believed in this from the start. Really looking forward to the upcoming presentations, and feel free to reach out anytime. Drop me a line. I've got website, email, and I'm on Instagram as well with the Invasive Art Initiative. All right, have a good rest of the conference.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Joshua. To learn more about Joshua's amazing work with Invasive Art Initiative, check out their website linked in the chat. I hope you can connect and maybe explore some collaboration opportunities, just explore more about what he's working on. Next, we have the wonderful Erica Mulder. Erica is the creative force behind Bramble Threads, where she champions eco art by transforming invasive plants into engaging, usable crafts. Through hands-on workshops like creating wreaths from native and invasive species, she educates communities on sustainable stewardship and local ecosystems. Featured in events such as the Eco Arts Festival, Free the Fern, Erica highlights the beauty and utility found in overlooked plants like invasive ivy. With a passion for land care and upcycling, her work blurs the line between art, ecology, and education, inspiring others to reimagine nature's resources and nurture a deeper connection to their surroundings. Today's presentation is titled Rebuilding Relationships, Why Explore Uses for Invasive Plants.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be here and really excited to listen to everyone. So I'm Erica Mulder. I'm a settler on the Coast Salish territories in the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I want to talk a bit about rebuilding relationships and why explore uses for invasive plants. So to begin that, I want to start by locating the work. Every invasive species is native somewhere, so context becomes incredibly important for this work. I really want to highlight it here. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, north of the colonial border in Vancouver, BC. All of my work with invasive species has happened on Coast Salish territories, most specifically, and where I'm presenting from today, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh unceded lands. So my personal practice. So I have a personal practice around making stuff with invasive plants, as well as hosting some workshops. So I've hosted workshops on ivy star wands, so making these cute little star wands out of English ivy, and a really common invasive plant in my area. And those workshops often go along with other community stewardship events where people are removing plants as well. So star wands, baskets, lots of stuff like that. I've made paper out of Daphne, which is actually very interesting. Daphne is the Daphne laureli, so spurge laurel is what it's known here. It's actually the same genus as the plants that are traditionally used in Nepal for paper making. So these plants are meant to be used for this, and it's a really exciting thing to explore. I do want to add the caveat that Daphne sap is incredibly toxic. And so if you do want to do this, a really high level of care is needed. So heads up on that. I've also made other things like brooms out of broom, Scotch broom brooms, so making hand brooms in turkey tail styles out of them. I've also made wreath bases out of holly. I've been experimenting with ink making. I've used weed for basket weaving. I want to find uses for all of them. But that's my personal practice. So one of the things that comes obviously sort of within that practice is that I'm operating on a pretty small scale. I'm making a few baskets here and there, a few pieces of paper, a few brooms. I'm making a pretty small number of things, even in the workshops that I host. So the amount that I'm working with is not a large amount. I'm not actually making a significant impact on the biomass of these plants. There is more ivy in the forest than baskets I could ever weave. So if the reason I'm doing this is not to sort of incentivize and to use up a lot of this material, why is this a thing that I still think is worth doing? And for me, that answer lays in an understanding of invasive species and an understanding of invasive species as a crisis of relationships. As I mentioned earlier, no invasive species is invasive everywhere. Everything is native somewhere. The English ivy in its native range is not invasive. Even the English ivy in the pot in a room is not invasive. It is only by its interactions with other species, other ecologies, other land, other people that it becomes invasive. So if we look about that, and then we look at also the broader context of other crises of relationship as well that have exacerbated the invasive species crisis, climate change, urbanization, massive changes in land use and increased sort of corridors and borders as we put roads everywhere, you can see these really broken relationships. And so looking at it through that way, exploring uses becomes a way to mend those relationships and a way to rebuild them and to center relationships in our understanding of that. So we can mend and rebuild these relationships. We have a understanding these crises through relationships means that we need to approach them by building relationships and by understanding ourselves within that broader context. And working with invasive species allows us to do that. Exploring uses for them provides us with an opportunity to build that relationship. And that relationship has a lot of really lovely lessons to teach us that can inform not just sort of the direction of the specific thing we're looking at, but the way we understand invasive species more broadly and the way we work with them. So one of the things that it offers really strongly and really palpably is an intimacy with plants. If you've ever done any weaving or any basketry or any paper making or any cordage making, you get to know these plants on a much deeper level, and there's some details that become really important in ways they hadn't previously. So Himalayan blackberry is one that I work with, where the name comes from, and you notice the seasonality of it. So blackberry fibers, in order to get the long, clean fibers, the long, clean, strong fibers you would want for cordage, are only available during a very, very, very short window of time from June to July. You can actually see in this photo, I was probably harvesting these ones in August. You can see the bark is still stuck to them. So I've missed that window a little bit there, but that window becomes something that you notice and becomes really important in ways it wouldn't otherwise. Even just looking at this sort of close up on a Scotch broom, you can see the way that it's blackened and darkened as it's been squished and pulled and yanked tight to hold the fibers in place. That's not something I ever would have noticed about Scotch broom if I hadn't been doing this. There's other things you notice as well. The different textures and brittlenesses that English ivy has as it's growing on trees or growing on the ground. The different ways that holly grows underneath the ground and produces roots, and how the colors of that age over time. In working with these plants, you get to know them a lot better, and you get to build this great intimacy with them. It's also about honoring the plants. Exploring ways to use these plants forces you to look at the gifts that these plants offer. And I think that's incredibly valuable. I think a lot of invasive species organizations and people working in that space are sort of actively moving away from and actively rejecting a lot of narratives that focus on sort of vilifying plants. Or I disproportionately focus on plants. I'm obviously invasive species are more than plants. I'm just a very plant-focused person. But a lot of organizations are moving away from narratives that vilify plants, but it's nonetheless something that's really easy to do if you're doing invasive species management. So you have this thing that sort of represents, and both is and represents all of this harm. It can be incredibly easy to sort of, at least emotionally for me, to sort of begin to hate the thing that's doing that. And in working with invasive plants like this, you cannot hate them. You have to appreciate the gifts that they offer. And those gifts also allow you to focus on the broader context of these plants. It is not that the Himalayan blackberry itself is evil or terrible, or the knotweed even is evil or terrible, but it is rather the context that it exists in. It's the fact that it was brought over here without particular care necessarily. It's the broader climate crisis that we're in. It's the broader biological crisis that we're in. It's the increased number of edges. And being able to focus on that broader context can be really valuable for active management and control. It's also really valuable to me in terms of emotional stability and emotional sustainability. Anybody working with invasive species and who starts to see it, I think it is an emotional drain at all moments in time. As invasive species proliferate everywhere and you see them everywhere, it is exhausting to look at these things that both are and represent this massive loss of biodiversity, of native plants and the relationships that they support and are built by. And the enormity of the challenge ahead is hard to handle, I find at least. And one of the reasons I find a lot of value in exploring uses for invasive species is that it allows me to handle that. It is no longer the case that when I find that new patch of ivy somewhere, it is just the new patch of ivy and a daunting management task ahead and a tragedy of loss. It is also an opportunity for basket making, for exploring soaps, for exploring dyes, which I've never figured out how to do. People keep telling me you can dye with ivy. I've never gotten it to work. The new patch of Daphne is an opportunity for paper making. It's also a sort of tragedy of the loss of what probably would have been a salal patch, and as this really beautiful native plant that is both berries that support both a wide variety of wildlife and people as well. But it's also an excuse to do some paper making, which is delightful. The new Scotch broom patch that you stumble upon is not just an increased fire risk and just sort of the worry that comes from that. But also maybe finally the time that you explore retting these plants and like extracting fiber. And I still really want to do that. I read about it in some 1700s French book, and now I desperately want to recreate it, but I haven't had the chance to. So the next time I come across Scott's room, it becomes an opportunity to do that. And I want to be clear that that doesn't negate the harm that these plants both cause and represent and exasperate, but it allows one to see things in a little bit of a better way that lets you keep doing this work in ways I wouldn't be able to otherwise. That's about it for me. I want to thank a lot of the people whose work has been incredibly inspirational to me in my understanding of invasive species and my work with them, including Joshua Ralph, who just presented before me. Thank you, Joshua. Invasive species are an incredibly complicated thing to think through and an incredibly complicated thing to understand. And there's lots of people who are doing really incredible work and writing around both invasive species and native species and understanding the role of relationships in our broader ecology, and as centering that as the framework through which we navigate all of this. That's it for me. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Erica. I really appreciate you really prodding our brains to really think differently about invasive species, and appreciate the Joshua shout out. That is awesome. We're going to jump into our next session. Before we do, to learn more about Erica's work, please visit her Instagram, Bramble Threads, which is linked in the chat. So yeah, stay connected and learn more about the amazing work that she's doing. Next, we have Jade Hoyer. Jade is a Minnesota-based artist and educator whose practice engages social and environmental narratives through printmaking, hand paper making, and installation. She has explored the ecological and cultural implications of invasive plant species, transforming them into paper-making fibers and art materials. By reimagining these species as creative resources, Jade invites conversations on environmental stewardship, colonial histories, and human impact on ecosystems. Her work has been recognized nationally and internationally and is included in collections from the Philippines to Brazil. As an assistant professor of art at Carleton College, she integrates invasive upcycling into her teaching, fostering dialogue at the intersection of art and ecology. She will be presenting on paper crafting with invasive plant species.
Well, thank you very much, Lorena. Thank you to the organizers for facilitating this opportunity. And I also want to say that it is a privilege to be following Joshua and Erica. I am excited to become familiar with your work. I also engage in papermaking. And while watching your presentations, I became interested in how my presentation might fit into the ecosystem of what we're presenting, given that I also make paper from invasive species. And I think what my presentation can offer here is a kind of case study, if you will, about how I sort of became interested in pursuing making paper from invasive plant species, pursuing paper making more broadly, how that relates to themes in my work, and how that becomes part of my teaching practice. And so sort of a personal journey to a form of collective making, if you will. For the uninitiated, I'd like to share a little bit about when we're talking about paper making, what is actually going on. This is a picture of a historic Western style paper mill, which involves sort of masticating fibers. You can see here using a piece of equipment called a Hollander beater to use sort of recycled sheets of paper and to grind the fibers down into something that is usable. And then we'll go on to the next one here, to form sheets by creating a slurry of cellulose-based material in some kind of frame, and then releasing that from the frame or from the screen, which is a process we call couching. So that is right now my sort of bread and butter as an artist and a maker. And I'd like to kind of share some of the art that sort of led me to be pursuing that. Back in college, I studied art and environmental studies, and so I'd always had an interest in the outdoors. I've also had the privilege to live in various parts across the country. I'm currently a resident in Minnesota, in Dakota land, but I've also lived in places as diverse as Colorado and Arkansas, and get to experience the different landscapes and cultures present of that. So this was one of the beauties of being in Denver, in Colorado, where I was most recently, is the proximity to some really beautiful landscapes. This was just outside of the city in Evergreen, Colorado. But there was also a sort of irony or paradox I found in what it meant to be living in such an outdoor enthusiast culture, that I had access to these gorgeous landscapes, to hiking and biking, but also I had the opportunity to purchase luxury environmental gear at a Yeti, a Patagonia, an REI, or a Columbia shop right downtown. And I think that that also sort of parallels the idea of kind of Western settlement ideas of a sort of romanticized landscapes. The image that you see right here is Timothy O'Sullivan, a sort of seminal 20th century or 19th century photographer. His work that was part of the Wheeler Project in the US that was meant to encourage settlement of the Western US. So there's these pictures of this sort of lush and romantic landscape with the explicit intention of settling that. So I created work that was using, you can kind of see the overlay of these images, using my old coffee cups, reflecting on the idea of individual versus collective environmental impact, what it meant to be a consumer of landscape, participating in things sort of conceptually that way. When I spent time in the Ozarks, I was also reflecting on the intersection of people and culture and place. And in particular, I was really drawn to the local quilting culture that was present in the Ozarks. The idea of upcycling applies to this in creating piece-based quilting. I'm not a fiber artist. I enjoyed learning about it, but I was really moved by the involvement of quilting, of craft tradition during the time that I spent in this community. I was the Wingate Artist in Residence for Arkansas Tech University, so I spent 6 months living there. And I had the opportunity to work with kiddos at Sequoia Elementary School in Russellville, Arkansas. So I had the privilege to work with every fifth grader that lives in the town of Russellville, Arkansas. And we all made paper together by recycling other paper, like I showed in that initial video. Here's me with some kids. Here is the ultimate mural that the children created. It used over 50 pounds of post-consumer paper fiber. And the fifth graders made all of the teal, the blue, the navy, and the aqua that you see there. So everything, every color that you see that isn't that sort of grayish color, and the kind of green, bright green and yellow. I think that creating art in collaboration with others is so much fun, and creating art in community is important to honor the expertise of everyone who's involved. And the kids were also present by creating these patterns that you can see in the sort of foreground of these work. These silkscreen patterns were based on things that they liked to do, which in an environment like the Ozarks involved also things like spending time out in nature. So there was a big sort of theme of these sort of water patterns, floral patterns. The cool thing about paper making, and I know we're talking about invasive species here, is that you can make paper out of anything cellulose-based. And so in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, I was reflecting upon the impact of COVID upon the Filipino healthcare communities. My mom is a nurse who's from the Philippines, and I created paper from my mother's old hospital scrubs that reflected on the deaths that were present in the Philippine nursing community in the US. And so Filipinos make up 4% of the US nursing population, but 30% of the deaths related to COVID-19. But this was my first experience engaging in making paper making from unconventional materials, so to speak. And that led me to, when I relocated to Minnesota, to consider how to make paper from plant species and how to make paper from species that we determine as invasive. I was participating in Joshua's reference of environmental restoration projects. It was a means of getting to know my local area. So I was in group efforts to manage spotted knapweed, which is considered an invasive species in the region for its aggressive propagation. And with all of these things, I do want to emphasize that paper making is pretty cool and pretty easy. I do it with kids. You can pull weeds out from anywhere, but that I also wanted to approach this sort of line of thinking with regard for expertise and how to be doing that in a way that was engaging in sort of proper management techniques. And so I would say, do this, but do this with consultation of how to be doing this in collaboration with your ecosystem. And so for me, it was learning out how to dig those guys out of the space. And then I worked with Lost Prairie Scientific Natural Area to be able to break down plant fibers. And so see here, you boil them, you run them through some machinery, you do a whole lot of tests. And knapweed actually worked pretty well for fibers, but it's pretty woody. And so it involved a lot of both chemical and physical processing and merging with other plant fibers in order to create sheets that I was happy with. I was effectively an invader myself. I relocated to Minnesota about 3 years ago. I feel like I was landing hot in that new location. And so in some ways I felt an affinity for these plant species that like maybe spotted knapweed is just trying to do a good job in its new place. And it had been the first time that I'd been in a location with the opportunity to consider what it meant to put down roots, to consider what it meant to be belonging to a place, especially as a sort of tenure track faculty member. There's an expression we use in the academy of growing where you're planted and moving everywhere in service of this sort of employment, so that I was able to reflect on making work in place for a while. This installation that you all see is 94 sheets of paper that is representative of the change from the first day of spring to the first day of summer. So in the top left, you can see the sort of dark gray blue color. In the bottom right, you can see this brighter green. And the color of the paper is statistically significant of the amount of daylight that's available in Northfield, Minnesota across the spring season last year. I actually worked with my girl who's a stats professor in that space, and she was able to calculate down to the fluid gram how much of each color I wanted to have to accurately transition that. And it was also a joy to be able to collaborate with that kind of expertise. And aside, she was like, how many grams do you think is in each sheet of paper? And I was like, 1 yogurt cup. And I think Erica went into sort of beautifully what it can offer us on a personal level to engage in this kind of art making. And Joshua talked about from a sort of community standpoint. I think also just from a visual standpoint, the ability to make something that has this beautiful color and this beautiful texture and this kind of tactile resonance that is different than something that I would be able to purchase from a store is really appealing to me. That's just a close-up. And then in a similar sort of mindset, I've been thinking about how to be sort of framing that personal journey towards a collective one. So I had the opportunity to work with the students at Greenville Park Elementary, which is a local elementary school in Northfield, Minnesota. And you can see my collaborator, Ada Leaphart's example of how we teach paper making to kids. We talk about merging the fibers as the baby robot dance, for example. And being able to integrate that kind of shared mindset with students, but also with college students as well. So I've had the opportunity to work with research students on creating paper from both local and not local fibers. Right now we're making paper out of cattail fiber and knapweed, as thinking about different ways of connecting with our local area. And this project was crazy. The kids made 200 sheets of paper out of cattail fiber and spotted knapweed fiber, which we then cut into tiny, tiny, tiny squares. There are 18,000 of them total to create this broader representation of their local landscape. Lately, sort of what's next for me is I've been reflecting on engaging in the Philippine art of weaving called banig. It's typically done using palm fronds, but I found that it works really well for handmade paper. So it seems sort of like a kind of place-based form of banig for me to be making banig from paper from my backyard. And I will also have 2 exhibitions showcasing this work in this year in Minneapolis and also in Massachusetts. I also look forward to, in this journey from personal to collective, to be considering developing paper-making curriculum. In particular, the college where I teach has an arboretum, a 900-acre prairie that is available to us, and to incorporate that into teaching. I've done some small-scale kind of conceptually based projects, but in the long term, I would like to design a whole curriculum that would involve this sort of place-based artistic making. And yeah, learn more. You can, I don't do Instagram, it makes me sad. But my website is jadehoyer.com. Thank you all.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jade, for that awesome presentation. If you want to learn more about Jade's work, maybe find some ways to collaborate or just dive into more of what she's doing, check out her website linked in the chat. For this next session, we have actually a recorded presentation coming up from some women artisans out of Xcalak, Mexico. We were actually able to record this interview thanks to Yolanda Barrios, who I believe is on the call with Mexico's National Commission for Knowledge and Use of Biodiversity, or CONABIO. Yolanda is a seasoned invasive species specialist with CONABIO with over 15 years of expertise in conservation biology and science communication. She holds a master's degree in conservation biology from the University of Kent and has been instrumental in developing Mexico's national strategy for invasive species, including the country's first official invasive species list and a tailored risk assessment methodology. Yolanda leads efforts to maintain and expand Mexico's invasive species database, conduct risk assessments, and create educational campaigns, bridging government, academia, and the public to advance national and regional invasive species programs. In this presentation coming up, Yolanda is interviewing Lenny Beatriz Batun and Naomi Gomez Sanchez. Lenny and Naomi are both associated with the artisan cooperative XCAL'ARTE in Xcalak, Mexico. This cooperative is comprised of women artists who create jewelry and crafts using local materials such as invasive lionfish. They use the lionfish and its fins to create original handcrafted jewelry that represents a connection with nature and local artisan culture. Their presentation is titled Crafting Connections Through Jewelry. So I will stop sharing here and we will get the video up and going.
Ahí en Xcalak, un poquito de la comunidad de Xcalak, porque la gente pues no sabe ni dónde está, cuánta gente vive ahí, y pues más o menos a qué se dedicaban antes, y si ahorita se dedican 100% a esto, las dos, por favor.
Ok, yo soy Lenny Beatriz Batun Zip, yo llevo viviendo en Xcalak 28 años, soy originaria de Yucatán, pero ahorita pues yo vivo allá. La artesanía me empezó a llamar desde que yo conocí a mi esposo, y yo de allá empecé a trabajar lo que es las semillas y todo eso. Ya
Pero ¿y cómo llegaste a Xcalak?
Mi esposo me conoció en Mérida, entonces pues ya vivo allá, pero pues me gusta la artesanía, y desde que yo conocí, pues lo venimos haciendo mucho tiempo, muchos años. Entonces este pececito invasor que está acabando todas las especies del mar, pues vimos que sí tienen potencial para venderlo y ayudar a la economía también de nuestros hogares. Y como dice mi compañera, es bueno la carne, muy rico, más rico que un filete normal. Lo pueden preparar también ceviche, en empanizado, y así es normal.
¿Y antes de esto a qué te dedicabas? ¿A las artesanías también?
No, o sea, no, yo era ama de casa nada más.
Ah, ok. Entonces, pues también te dio como un ingreso, un trabajo
Sí,
extra.
sí.
Ok, muy bien. Y ahorita 100%, bueno, aparte de seguir siendo ama de casa, pero 100% te dedicas
sí.
a estas artesanías. Ok,
De
¿y
ama de casa
cómo?
siempre yo soy, porque tengo mis 3
Sí.
niñas todavía, y pues
Ajá,
tengo una chica, pero pues trato de hacer porque me gusta, ¿no? Y obvio, pues me gusta el dinero para que yo tenga.
ajá. Y ahorita nos platican un poco de las ventas. en dónde los
Sí.
venden y cómo les está yendo.
Y bueno,
Norman.
Xcalak, para que veamos dónde queda Xcalak, es Quintana Roo, al sur. Creo que lo más lo ubican más en Mahahual, porque es una zona turística. Y ya 60 kilómetros más para el sur, y ahí queda Xcalak. Es la punta, digamos, el principio de todo, de Quintana Roo. Dicen
Ajá.
que es el último pedazo de Quintana Roo, no, pero dicen que también es el principio de México, porque
Está,
tenemos la frontera de Belice.
exacto. A ver, Noemi, ahora sí tú te presentes.
Ok, mi nombre es Noemí Gómez Sánchez y tengo 39 años viviendo en Xcalak. Soy nacida en Campeche, pero soy crecida en Xcalak desde los 8 años. Xcalak para mí es un lugar hermoso que yo vivía en un pueblito anteriormente y llegar a Xcalak para mí fue la gloria. Entonces, Xcalak ha sido parte de mi vida. Soy madre, y mujer emprendedora, porque empecé desde niña prácticamente a ser madre, si se puede decir así, porque a los 15 años fui mamá y de ahí empecé a apoyar a mi pareja a trabajar. Yo vendía ropa primero en productos domésticos y pues prácticamente desde ahí empecé a ser una mujer emprendedora y empecé a trabajar y hoy en día soy una artesana, me dediqué a hacer artesanía, soy una artesana orgullosamente de mi trabajo. Em, Me ha ayudado mucho a salir adelante como madre.
Ay, estoy llorando yo también.
Porque no es fácil. La vida no es fácil cuando
¿Cuántos
tienes
hijos, cuántos hijos tienes tú, Noemi?
cuatro hijos y empecé a los 15 años. No porque yo quisiera, sino
Sí.
cuestiones del destino, podría decir yo.
Ujú.
Pero hoy en día me siento orgullosa de tener a mis hijos y de ser lo que soy,
Claro, claro.
porque esta es una lucha. O nos dejamos o salimos adelante.
Sí.
Y me siento orgullosa, como vuelvo a repetir, me siento orgullosa porque a sus apoyos de las instituciones que nos han ayudado, de verdad que hoy en día les puedo decir gracias, gracias, gracias.
Muchas
Porque sin sus apoyos de ustedes, nosotros no hubiésemos llegado a donde estamos.
Sí.
De verdad. Y se los puedo decir con lágrimas en los ojos y de corazón. Porque antes la mujer no tenía tanto apoyo, ¿no? Sí. Y siempre decían que las mujeres somos para la casa. Sí. Pero no es así. Somos chingonas y podemos salir adelante solos, si queremos.
Sí, así es.
Y pues
So,
igual que mi compañera, venimos de Xcalak, vivimos en Xcalak y amamos nuestro pueblo. A pesar de que sea un pueblo pequeñito, amamos nuestro pueblo. No podemos decir que es un pueblo que tenemos turista y que podemos vender nuestros productos al 100, porque no es así.
Muy poco.
Pero las veces que nos invitan a eventos, les damos gracias a todas las personas que nos compran un producto de nosotros y nos sentimos tan orgullosas porque se van tan contentos de nuestros productos y pues sentimos que nos representan ellos en sus comunidades donde andan, donde llevan nuestros productos. Entonces, yo me siento muy feliz por todas esas personas que nos han comprado de nuestras artesanías y que
América.
lo dice, esta artesanía la compramos de Xcalak, un pueblo olvidado para nosotros de parte del gobierno, pero las personas que nos compran nos representan a nosotros por lo que compran y dicen viene de Xcalak. y nos sentimos orgullosas de dónde estamos.
Ay, qué bonito. I am I too. Este,
Lo sentimos,
em,
Yolanda.
sí, es que pues, sí. Bueno, es que sí, es que sí voy a llorar.
Perdón.
Em, I'm also a very sensitive person. Yo también soy muy chillona, oiga. They are, well, en Xcalak. Entonces, primero un poquito de la invasión del pez león en Xcalak. Pues cuándo se empezó, cómo empezó a afectar a la comunidad. No sé si es principalmente una comunidad pesquera o si eso lo empezaron a hacer a partir de la invasión. Un poquito de la historia del pez león y ustedes.
Pues en la comunidad de Xcalak fue detectado el pez león en el 2009. Este fue cuando se detectó allá y cuando empezaron a dar conocimiento de parte de la CONAM que pues había una especie exótica invasora ahí en la población y que estaba perjudicando el medio ambiente. Y después ya vinieron como que capacitaciones para monitorear y sacar el pez león. Entonces, a través de eso, en el 2008, pues solo fueron puras capacitaciones. Ya después, en el 2018, ya nos integramos nosotros como mujeres de la comunidad para, pues como ya hacíamos artesanías, empezamos como que a ver que esas aletas de esa especie estaban muy bonitas y que nosotros podíamos aprovecharlas con nuestras artesanías, porque todo lo que nosotros veíamos para nosotros era dinero, o sea, si veíamos una semilla, esto es dinero para nosotros. Si veíamos una hoja seca y estaba bonita, nos llamaba la atención, esto nos sirve para hacer artesanía. Íbamos a la playa a recoger conchitas y todo lo que veíamos, mi mamá me decía, tú a todo le ves dinero, hija, me dice. Ay, mami, le digo, pues es que aquí hay potencial, hay dinero. Y cuando vimos lo del pez león, la verdad que tiene un color muy hermoso, empezamos a trabajar el pez león. Anteriormente, en el 2008, sí lo trabajé yo, pero se le puede decir barniz, que queda muy suave la pieza y obviamente no tardaba mucho y se rompía. En el 2018 tomamos un curso con resina para trabajar las aletas y pues vimos que obvio tenía más potencial y todo, ¿no? Que no se rompía, que las podías mojar, que pues que nos gustó nuestro trabajo de esa manera. Y ya empezamos de poco a poco porque pues la verdad al principio no teníamos una pieza hermosa, sino que pues estábamos empezando. Ahorita yo creo que hoy en día podemos decir que ya somos unas maestras de nuestro arte, en lo que hacemos, en nuestra joyería, y que pues es una herramienta de trabajo para nosotros que nos ha ayudado a la economía para nuestros hogares y que también pues de esta manera nosotros aportamos en la comunidad y en el ecosistema marino, ya que pedimos que por favor nos apoyen en sacar al pez león y a los a los que llegan a turistas les decimos que consuman el pez león, que es una especie que nos está perjudicando al medio ambiente, pero que a través de eso también nosotros nos beneficiamos como comunidad, porque venden la carne, puede preparar en comida y pues nosotros aprovechamos las aletas. Y sí, mucha gente nos han preguntado que si no es venenoso, porque tienen como que la teoría que el pez león es un pez venenoso. Y nosotros le decimos que no es un pez venenoso, que es un pez que es muy rico en sus carnes y que lo único que tiene toxinas son sus espinas, pero que la carne es muy rica y aparte tiene mucha proteína. Y pues nosotros aprovechamos las aletas y sí nos han preguntado si nuestros aretes o nuestras collares tienen espina o no te pinchan o huele a marisco o algo así. Y pues nosotros les decimos que no, que lo pueden sacar, que lo pueden tocar, que lo pueden oler y todo eso y que no contiene nada, nada de
Ok.
marisco.
A ver,
Y la verdad, hemos,
Bueno,
ok,
continúa. Es que, ajá. ¿Cuántas mujeres participan en esta actividad? ¿Son puras mujeres? ¿Cómo se organizan? Y para los viajes y con los niños y todo esto, ¿cómo le hacen?
Bueno, nosotros solo somos dos ahorita trabajando porque en un tiempo fuimos 10 personas y mujeres, pero la verdad, como ama de casa, como trabajadoras de otros lados, porque como te decimos, hay un poco de turismo, hay hoteles también allá, se dedican a otras cosas, a la pesca, porque Xcalak de pesca se dedican allá. Entonces buscan las mujeres hacer otras cosas, no sé, hacer panes, hacer, no sé, limpieza de allá de los hoteles, de casas. eh, y entonces, sí tenía el interés de trabajar, pero después ya no querían como que más, les hacía más fácil ir a trabajar y ganar rápido de lo que te platiqué. Pero nosotros nos quedamos porque nos gusta. eh, Me gusta cómo queda el trabajo, me gusta que me digan, mira qué bonito, y que se vaya a tantos lugares. Se ha ido nuestro producto a Europa, América, Alemania, a todos los estados también que tenemos acá, también se han ido a varios lados de acá de México también. Entonces, nos sentimos orgullosas nada más, aunque seamos nosotros dos que estamos trabajando ahorita, eso me satisface mucho a mí. Pero pues quisiéramos que otras personas se sumen con nosotros, pero no quieren o no pueden y así.
Ujú,
Y sin embargo, como nosotras, como ya te comentamos, somos amas de casa. Yo
ujú,
tengo mi niña de 11 años apenas va a cumplir, una de 16 y una de 21. Entonces, ya crecieron, ahorita puedo salir, porque de antes no estaba más chica, ella era más, como sus hijos de ella son más grandes, ella
ujú,
salía a dar cursos, a darnos de conocer y todo eso. Y ahorita pues
ujú,
ya yo tengo de esa, un poco de libertad de que ya están grandes mis hijos, poder salir y nos sentimos
ujú,
orgullosos.
ujú. Y entonces sus esposos y su comunidad los apoyan con esta actividad, están orgullosos de ustedes, de que han salido, están orgullosos de ustedes, así, ¿qué piensa la comunidad de lo que hacen?
creo que aproximadamente hoy en día serían como 600 personas más o menos, porque es un pueblo chico
Ujú,
y es pesquero. La mayoría de los hombres viven de la pesca allá.
ujú,
Este, y sí nos han apoyado mucho. Hay personas de la comunidad que sacan el pez león y nos regalan el pez león entero o nos regalan solamente las aletas y ellos ocupan la carne. Y pues referente al compañero de vida, sí nos ha apoyado mucho, tanto en los viajes, en cuidar a los niños, en apoyarnos cuando necesitamos algo urgente. Sí, ellos han estado al 100 para nosotros. Han sido parte de nuestro
ujú.
proyecto también,
¿Y
se puede
sus
decir
hijos?
así, porque nunca nos han dicho un no, sino es un sí.
¿Y sus hijos, hijas, también las apoyan? ¿Están?
Hoy en día te puedo decir que mis hijos se sienten orgullosas de su madre porque dice, mamá, tú eres una mujer muy chingona y te respetamos, porque gracias a ti y a tu trabajo nos ayudaste a papá a salir adelante y nos apoyaste para atender nuestros estudios.
También de mi parte, también ahorita, como te digo, la mediana me está apoyando en este aspecto, cuidando a su hermanita.
¿Sí creen que haya bajado la población de pez león? Porque pues en un tiempo sí subió, pero creo que últimamente hay menos. Eh, ¿Cómo ven eso a futuro? ¿Creen que siga? Puedan, bueno, siempre va a estar porque erradicarlo es
Sí,
imposible, ¿no? Es una invasión
exacto.
marina y es imposible. Ustedes me imagino que usan poco, ¿no? No necesitan tanto para hacer las...
Ujú, sí,
Ajá.
efectivamente. Ujú. Sí, en el 2008 al 2009, 2015 más o menos. La verdad, estaba muy fuerte ahí en la población. El pez león era demasiado lo que se sacaba, tanto chico como grande. Creo que ya en el 2020 más o menos, como que disminuyó un poco, porque hablamos con el pescador, que es el que se encargaba de monitorear el pez león allá, y que aparte que él es pescador, siempre le preguntábamos a Don Ne que si veía mucho pez león, y nos decía que no, que esta vez no, era muy poquito lo que ya había disminuido allá. Ahorita tiene como 2 años que no le hemos preguntado, porque no hemos necesitado aletas, porque la verdad las aletas, las que nos sacan nosotros las secamos y las guardamos en bolsas Ziploc y no le pasa nada, y las podemos tener como se dice, resguardadas, y ya cuando las vamos a utilizar ya podemos trabajarlas, las podemos pintar o las podemos usar en colores naturales. Son aletas que no les pasa nada.
Y más o menos como cuánto venden en número de aretes o de collares o de cosas así en general.
Pues la verdad te puedo decir que este año es nuestro. Sí. Tanto en trabajo con personas así como tú, que nos buscan para que les demos conferencia, o que les demos videollamada, o que les demos, necesitan nuestro tiempo, y nos sentimos saturada, y tanto en nuestro trabajo también lo mismo. O sea, no nos damos abasto, ¿me entiendes?
Ajá.
Porque o trabajamos la artesanía, o nos enfocamos en contestar y llamar y todo
Ajá.
eso, sí, se nos hace un poco complicado porque solo somos dos. Sí. Pero si hubiera otra persona, yo creo que se encargaría de la logística, que viene siendo tanto la información de compartir videos, compartir nuestras artesanías, de contestarle a ustedes, que sí te deja así como que un poco mal, tanto en los envíos como en responderte tus mensajes, y son cosas así que pues sí me siento mal, porque pues ustedes quieren, o sea, ustedes quieren conocernos, quieren hablar con nosotros, y nosotros, le digo a ella, como que pues nos estamos dando al rogar, pero no es que nos demos al rogar, sino que sí, este año sí nos hemos ocupado mucho, y también nos sentimos pues cansadas, pero pues satisfecha, porque es nuestro año para nosotros.
Ajá. Pero ¿tienes una idea de cuántos productos han vendido, por ejemplo, en lo que va del año o del mes o?
No, pues sí te puedo decir que hemos vendido como estos meses como 300 piezas, y es que no más. Sí.
Ok. ¿Y cada cuándo viajan? Porque viajan como a eventos, ¿no? Es donde venden los productos.
Viajamos a eventos cuando nos invitan para ventas, sí, y cuando nos invitan solamente para tomar cursos de capacitación, llevamos un poquito, pero lo poquito que llevamos, a veces nos preguntan si llevamos, si vendemos, era para, pues, para pláticas, para escuchar pláticas y todo, lo que tocan el tema de la pesca furtiva, y todo lo que tiene que ver con el mar, ¿no? Pero nosotros aprovechamos también para vender, y sí vendimos también. Y como te comento, la gente pues ya nos conoce.
Ajá.
Ya nos conoce bastante, y pues ya somos como que como dice Mateo, somos las pioneras del peleón. Sí.
Sí, cuando estuve con ustedes me comentaban que también estaban capacitando a otras mujeres en Belice y en otros lugares. ¿Eso sigue pasando o ya no?
No, en Isla Mujeres di un curso para el pez león. En Chetumal di uno, pero pues ahí pues ellos no se dedican al pez león, lo tomaron de otra manera. Y pues sí, se ha dado las capacitaciones. En Cozumel a unas señoras, pero tampoco lo dejaron, ¿no? O sea, no le tomaron tanta importancia. Entonces, pues sí se les da la capacitación y todo, pero pues no, como que no les llama la atención, o no se interesan, o no les gusta, no sabemos el por qué.
O sea, realmente ustedes son casi las únicas que hacen esto.
Sí, en el estado, sí, prácticamente sí. En Belice también sé que hacen, porque tuvimos la fortuna de reunirnos con ellas igual, perdón, conocerlas y ver sus productos. Y su calidad de ella es muy diferente al de nosotros. Pero ya les
Ah,
pasé el tip, espero que lo hayan tomado. Sí.
padre. Mm, pues algo más que nos quieran comentar. Yo creo que con esto tenemos pues mucho ya para presentar. Y ha estado así que hay muy interesante y muy
Sí.
bonito, y muy emocionante platicar con ustedes.
Amazing. Yes, thank you so much, Lenny and Noemi, who were featured in that video, for sharing your story with us. And a huge thank you to Yolanda with Canabio for translating. To learn more about the work at XCAL'ARTE, I will share a quick screen here so you can get a little closer up snapshot of the products that they make, the beautiful jewelry that they create. And in the chat, Jody shared earlier a link to their Facebook page. We'll chat a little bit more about ways to support the amazing work occurring with the artisans at XCAL'ARTE. In the meantime, we have time now for a Q&A session. So with all of our speakers, Joshua, Erica, Yolanda is in the chat currently, but definitely feel free to ask any questions regarding XCAL'ARTE in the chat, and Jade as well. Mary asked, do you think more women would stay with the work if they got training in running a business as well as in the crafting? So that's a question for Yolanda. If she's able to provide a response in the chat, that will be awesome. Otherwise, we'll definitely follow up with definitely more details about XCAL'ARTE and yes, how we can definitely support the amazing work that they're doing. And then again, Mary also asked about contact information. Yes, the Facebook page, I would say, is the best mode of communication for now, but Yolanda in the chat can share a bit more details. I know I can share that there are some logistical issues in terms of being able to transport the jewelry to a shipping facility, but things are in the works. So hopefully in the coming months, hopefully maybe sometime even this year, it'll be a bit easier to be able to purchase the jewelry online. So more to come there. There's this previous question sharing how they appreciate the efforts to restore relationships with plants and moving away from language that vilifies them, and asking, do you ever run into issues with the opposite, that when people start creating with these plants or other species, that they want to start cultivating them or push back on management efforts? I think it's a really great question for any of the speakers if you want to jump in, because I'm sure you might have come across situations like this where you've received this question.
Can start if that's okay, because I really appreciated this question too. And my short answer is no, not directly, but I'm going to elaborate on that. I'm sure there's people out there who definitely do this, and such as to say, I'm going to share a bit of an anecdote. There is a restoration group local to where I am, who for years was removing some Japanese butterbur from a location, and one time they were in the middle of it, in the middle of this environmental restoration work. And this Japanese family had come down and asked, like, what are you doing? We harvest this spot. And I don't want to share too many details because I'm fairly certain I am able to share this story, but don't want to make it identifiable. And the restoration group was not aware that this was something that was culturally significant to anyone living within the area. So they came to an agreement that a certain spot would have the Japanese butterbur that is welcome to harvest whenever this family wants to come by, but there still was mitigation efforts needed to make sure that it wouldn't spread outside that. So a little bit of a boundary that was made between what was harvestable and what needed to ensure that the environment and kind of like local ecosystem could still thrive. So I guess long story short is I really believe that there's a middle ground between a sort of kill it all attitude that a lot of invasive species work has been engaging with for decades, and also not being like, whoo, invasive species everywhere. Let's plant seeds of whatever plants that come from wherever. And I also think it's important to note that eradication may not ever be possible. And eradication in and of itself is a very rude relationship to have to begin with. And I'll leave it at that. I think there was something else I wanted to go for, but if any of the other presenters want to answer their thoughts, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Joshua said. I haven't had any experience with any of the work that I've done incentivizing people to grow things, but it is absolutely the case that all of the work I've done is very much in the context of people who are already interested in invasive species removal and management. Like a lot of the workshops I've done sort of go in parallel with invasive plant removal events. So that's not certainly something I've experienced, but I'm not going to say that doesn't happen. I certainly know that there's people who have quite a lot of hesitancy towards doing management of invasive species because they can see them as useful. That seems to be a narrative I hear most around mullein. But I think it's also like working with these plants is just an opportunity to know them better, and it's sort of an education opportunity. So I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it's not something I've personally seen in my work.
Yeah, and I think just to add to what Joshua and Erica were saying, I think the question is essentially posing like that by creating a sort of attractive process or attractive products, could we become kind of victims of our success of making something enticing that could result in a logical conclusion of fostering the raw material towards that? I think my own approach to it is, and I'll stress that I'm not, I am very much an indoor child. Our network is called Indoor Children. Last week, my mother-in-law asked me to pick some basil for spaghetti. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And so I think for me, my own approach to that is to be kind of like acquiring this plant mass in consultation, like with experts who know what to identify, how to harvest it, how to do that safely, and how to process that safely. Like I've been working a lot with spotted knapweed. When you're boiling down those plant products, you don't want to be doing that in an interior space. Like I'm allergic to knapweed, and so I would create like a sort of like interior kitchen dust miasma, you know. And so I think in my own purview, which is my personal studio practice as an individual and as a teacher, is thinking of not only sharing the cool thing that I'm doing, the pretty thing that I'm making, but the sort of procedures and processes that I'm following to be doing that responsibly too.
That's awesome. Thank you all for sharing your responses there. I know that Yolanda is actually now, I believe, is able to answer some questions live. We had quite a few questions related to kind of, I guess, the best way to support the amazing artisans at XCAL'ARTE. I believe Lenny and Noemi might also be on the call as well if they're able to put anything in the chat, or if Yolanda, you're able to help facilitate any translation needed to get some of these questions answered. But I think the main questions here are regarding, the best ways to support, and if there's ever any ways to support via like trainings to further develop their business and crafting practices.
Hi, Lorena. Yes, Noemi and I don't know if both of them are on or just Noemi, if they can just pueden escribir algo en el chat para saber quiénes son y que las agreguen como panelistas y que puedan también abrir su micrófono y participar, chicas.
Hola.
There they are.
Sí,
Hola.
Noemí. Soy Noemí.
Hola, Noemí. Nos preguntan que de qué forma los podrían apoyar. No sé si puedes prender tu camarita para que vean tu carita. Si no, así está bien.
Ok. Un momento.
¿De qué forma los las pueden apoyar las personas que están escuchando? ¿Vas de regreso a Xcalak?
Sí, estoy yendo de regreso, estoy viajando ahorita.
Okay. ¿De qué forma los pueden apoyar? Pues con, no sé, con promoción, con compras, porque sé que es difícil que ustedes envíen las cosas. So I'm asking them how we can help them out with, o para que ustedes compartan con más entrenamiento, ¿de qué forma?
Pues yo creo que lo más importante es que nos den a conocer y que las personas conozcan que a través de ustedes o a través de otras instituciones el trabajo que nosotros como mujeres estamos elaborando con esta especie, ya que no solo perjudica en el medio ambiente, sino que también en un futuro va a perjudicar a nuestros jóvenes que van creciendo. Y pues también nos apoyarían también con promoción, promover nuestros productos y que nuestros productos se den a conocer en diferentes.
Yes, so she's on the bus back to Xcalak. They were
del
in
mundo
Cancun over the weekend for
y del estado.
So she's saying basically to promote their products and what they do, and that it's also to help the environment and for the future of the young people in the state and in the town. So through promotion. But as I was saying also in the chat, it's very hard for them to send the products because they are a 4-hour bus ride away from the nearest post office. So their products are $15, $10. They told me the most expensive thing they've sold is a set of earrings and necklace and everything, and it was like $40. So if it's just a pair of earrings or something small, it's more expensive to take the bus than to actually what they could earn. So I think yes, maybe finding ways to help them also in this way, or with big orders, that could be another option. It takes them about a week to make the jewelry, so they can make several things at a time. So if we order them before time, they can make them. Te estoy diciendo de que se tardan mucho en mandar las cosas, Noemí, porque viven lejos de donde las pueden mandar. Creo que ya te congelaste. Si quieres, apaga tu cámara para que no se... Sí. Yeah, she's on the bus, so she's having a hard time with connection.
No worries there, but thank you so much for clarifying those points. And yeah, definitely please follow their Facebook account shared in the chat, and you will continue to possibly share other ways to support XCAL'ARTE, whether it's via upcoming newsletters, future events, all that jazz. But thank you so much, Yolanda. I want to ask one more question. I'm going to kind of merge the last two that we received, and Yolanda, I think you might be able to plug in here as well. But generally asking about, the process of making crafts out of invasive species. In one case, asking particularly about making inks and dyes out of invasive plants, and asking it specifically if any of y'all have made paper or other products out of invasive honeysuckle, and if there's any workshops to attend. And I know that quite a few of y'all do host your own workshops, so maybe just sharing a little bit about your individual processes and how possibly we could attend any of your workshops, whether it's in person or online. And I'll let whoever wants to take it first go on ahead.
I'd say just sort of the Minnesota Center for Book Arts has a lot of programming connected to hand papermaking and papermaking from plants. I feel like within the field of papermaking, Helen Hebert and Andrea Peterson are both.
Oh, I think you froze up there, Jade, a bit, but I know I saw you typing out an answer. So hopefully you could also continue sharing in the chat. But I guess while we're waiting for Jade's Wi-Fi to come back on, yeah, Joshua, if you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I saw both those questions. And what I like to say, at least from my practice, is that it was very much a situation of I'm baking pasta, I'm throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. That being said, and I think maybe bouncing off what Jade was saying, is there's lots and lots of people who do lots of different crafts and are willing to share. So yeah, you've never made paper before. YouTube is a fantastic resource. And with a base of understanding how to make paper, as was the case of mine, with my paper making, which is a very basic process, was very much that, is who's willing to share the resources. And then with my knowledge on invasive species and with other people who are from these restoration groups who might be able to offer insight, like what also can be added to this process, what can also be utilized, what might have, now that I've made basic paper making, what plants could be translated to this. Specifically for ink, I'd really recommend Jason Logan's Make Ink book. There's nothing, as far as I'm aware, in there specific to invasive species ink, but there are many, many recipes. I honestly think it's probably over 100, if not close to, of different processes to extracting dyes from different plants and different parts of plants as well. And with that, with my own ink making journey, it was used as very much a baseboard. Is, oh, this is how you make ink from these leaves. These are from the same family as this invasive plant. How can this translate? How can I adapt this recipe to get the best color? Is huge advocate for gleaning off of what other people are willing to share, because you're not in this process alone, and lots of people make lots of different things from different plants, and there's a lot of crafts and a lot of different art out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Joshua. I don't know, Jade, if you want to wrap up your thought, 'cause I know you cut out at the end.
Yeah, my computer decided to update. I think that with all of these things is that I think that there's limited information, at least I've found from my own research, on how to make X with invasive species, because I think that most of the guidance towards that is how to make, like for paper making in plants, it's like how to make paper from plants, you know? And I think my own process of using both invasive and native species has been sort of starting from what's known and then trial and error moving forward from that.
That's great. Thank you, Jade. Unfortunately, I have to cut our first Q&A session over here, but we will have a couple of more Q&A sessions coming up. So please continue to add comments in the chat. Yes, Yolanda, please feel free to add.
Super quickly, I just think that with every workshop and every activity on invasive species, it is really important to communicate the fact that these are invasive species. They are very easily dispersed. Sometimes the seeds just fly away from these little plants very easily. So it is also important to communicate to the people that are using them that they have to be careful if they're taking them to their house to make the craft over there. They're not dispersing them along the way, and not to lose the message. I think it's great that there's crafts and arts making and that the message can be put across, but it's also not important not to forget the science behind all these plants and what we are also trying to work on, eliminating them and promoting our native plants.
Yes, thank you for that, Yolanda. I appreciate that. Yeah, especially with the plants piece, we want to make sure we're not accidentally spreading further. And I know it's been mentioned previously, that's why it's so important to work to collaborate with local conservation nonprofits. I know if you've heard, at least in the United States, if you've heard of the National Wildlife Federation, and there's different chapters all over the country, and I'm sure there's similar organizations in other countries as well. But find your local conservation chapter and working with them to repurpose invasive biomass removed during volunteer events is a really great way to get started and collaborate with other people in your area.
All right. So for our next section is going to be consumer products and materials innovation. And so in this section, we'll look at how invasive species are being reimagined through entrepreneurship and innovation. From pet treats and leathers to building materials, companies are creating products that not only reduce ecological harm, but also build sustainable markets that reward restoration. This is about bridging science, business, and design to prove that ecological responsibility and economic opportunity can go hand in hand. And so our first speaker for this section is Alivia Beadell-Kaplan. Alivia is the strategy and operations lead at INVERSA Leathers, where she drives the company's mission to turn invasive species into regenerative, high-quality leathers that heal ecosystems. From lionfish in the Atlantic to python in the Everglades, she helps scale nature-positive supply chains that reward environmental restoration. With a background in economics, strategy, and cross-cultural communication, Alivia blends business acumen with a passion for conservation to create lasting impact. Her work ensures INVERSA's growth aligns with its core goal, transforming ecological threats into sustainable resources that protect biodiversity, support local communities, and inspire a reimagined relationship with the natural world.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for having me. Today, I'm here to talk about our work at INVERSA and how we are leveraging the power of fashion to help solve the invasive species problem, specifically related to animals that can be turned into leather. So Getting a little bit more into sustainable materials as a category, in fashion, there have been a lot of issues with actually implementing sustainable materials in the supply chains. And particularly within leather, this is because there are a lot of barriers to actually including new forms of leather. So, a lot of the new materials that are coming out that have sustainability benefits or other things have a lot of requirements that make it really difficult for the brands to introduce them. So brands have to re-engineer the entire system because the stitching won't work anymore. They'll have to invest in adjacent machinery to help deal with these new materials. And they're fighting against a consumer perception that already exists that leather is a high quality luxury material. So there's a lot of dynamics at play here in the fashion industry that the association of leather is a positive thing, particularly within luxury brands. Consumers really value the qualities and the natural properties that natural leather has. And so it's a really big challenge for brands to shift to materials that may be worse in quality, especially on the higher end of the market. And so at INVERSA, what we've seen is that there's an opportunity here for us to inverse all these challenges into opportunities by substituting invasive derived leathers into the luxury supply chains for high-end leather goods. So the great thing about leather that's made from invasive species is that it is just leather. It naturally fits into existing systems. No one needs to invest in an entirely new production line in order to scale the use of the material within their brand. They can just build off of the deeply ingrained consumer behaviors around using invasive species and just using leather in general as a luxury product. And instead of having to do any of that, communication around like why a product is worse, it's not worse. It's just the same exact quality. It's still an animal leather. It's just coming from a source that is more regenerative and really upcycling the conservation waste that would have gone to the landfill instead. So I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about invasive species today, but just to add on to the pile, invasive species, as the UN IPBES report in 2023 came out saying, they're responsible for driving, at least in part, 60% of species extinctions, and they cause $423 billion of global economic damages annually. This kind of highlights, though, that there's a resource gap. So while there is $423 billion in cost damages, we are really lacking the actual firepower we need economically to address all that damage. So I think it's something like 10% of that total cost is actually what's spent by governments globally on invasive management. So it's a big gap. And where we feel this is really exciting here is that the fashion industry is a big source of economic productivity. So the fashion industry, it has a lot of demand for materials. So that's a lot of spend that can be redirected towards fighting invasive species. So already luxury fashion has an exotic leather problem. So they are getting a lot of PR flack for untraceable or sometimes unethical practices in farming. And by substituting in invasive leathers, they no longer have to face these things because we are required to make sure that we're preventing COBRA and perverse incentives essentially in our supply chains, because we partner with local government agencies just to make sure that we're aligned with conservation priorities. So we help address some of these things for the fashion brands, and then they, have a source of exotic leather that they can feel good about being ethical and that they know is going to be good for the environment. On the other hand, fashion is producing 10% of global carbon emissions, but a lot of their existing material supply chains are not manufactured, even in the sustainability sense, to naturally make their incentives aligned to just do something good with the sourcing. So by creating a way that their sourcing of products can actually have an impact on nature, we're making that a lot easier for brands. So INVERSA is creating this resilient supply chain for ethical exotic materials. You can see here in the background and throughout this deck, all of the fashion images are from actual runway shows that INVERSA has done. So this one here is with our partner Gabriella Hearst for her fall/winter 2025 INVERSA Python collection, where she featured the leathers in jackets, boots, skirts, and a variety of leather goods. So it really kind of shows the broad applicability of invasive python skin. And it helps kind of visualize like what can be possible in the future as we continue to expand into new species. So kind of moving back to how this is really helping fight invasions, the luxury fashion industry spends $10 billion every year on luxury exotic leather sourcing. So that's, purchasing everything that goes into your wallets, into your shoes. So this is what we see at INVERSA as a massive opportunity that we can redirect existing consumer spending towards fighting invasions and really incentivizing hunters on the front line to target invasive species because we can pay them adequately. So it's kind of a great system where we can, take that European fashion capital and really redirect it to the rural economies where they're doing the important work of protecting the ecosystems. In terms of our supply chain, so as I mentioned before, we work with 3 species: the lionfish, which is a problem throughout the Caribbean; the carp, which is a problem throughout the Midwestern US, mostly down from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico. So all that freshwater ecosystem, a lot of it is carp. And then the invasive python. So we're partnered with the state of Florida, and we manage a program called the Patrick Program, and we support their invasive python management efforts in the Everglades. And so in terms of our sourcing for all of these species, what we do is we will work with local hunters and fishers to spin up a supply chain operation that can manage those species in that specific geography. So, for lionfish, we actually have a partner, I think he'll be speaking right after this, with Pezzy Pets, and for them, they are, managing local collectives of fishers and helping remove fish from the reefs where they are extremely detrimental to native biodiversity. Carp, it's a similar thing. We work with local fishers, and the pythons within the Patrick Program, we have about 50 hunters who go out into the field on a consistent basis to go and remove the python. So kind of varies by species based on who's the expert in the region, but there's a lot of ways to take them out of the environment. So we have some great partners across all 3 species and various states. On the demand side, we've had some really exciting brand partnerships in the fashion world. Some of our customers like Gabriella Hearst have even been so kind as to mention us in Vogue articles and kind of do, collective consumer education. Here in this image, you can see a bag from our brand partner, Kate. So, we have a lot of incredible brands who are kind of helping us fight this good fight. And as we continue to see demand grow, we're really excited about, how the fashion industry is helping redirect these resources. So this isn't just an idea, it is working in practice. We've worked with many brands today, and we're excited to continue growing with these partners and more partners. And a little bit more about the impact of this. So, obviously the invasives that I mentioned here are established invasions, right? So any of us in invasive species management, what we know is that there's kind of this concept of the invasion curve, where once there's an established invasion, what you really want to do is create a long-term management program, because if you effective, or you can't really eradicate, most likely you have to create what's called an effective eradication. And in order to do that, you need to manage the density of the invasive back down to what's called the critical density threshold, under which the invasive no longer is harming the environment to the same extent that it was. So as an impact case study of how this can work with the lionfish, within 5 weeks of invasion, research has shown that the lionfish will consume 79% of the native juvenile reef fish that are on a specific reef. But what happens is if you manage the lionfish back down to the critical density threshold, you actually see a 50 to 70% restoration of those native juvenile reef fish populations. And so what our program can do is we help reach that. So to date, we've removed over 30,000 lionfish. And what this has done is, in the geographies that we worked, we increased fisher incomes by 14 to 20 times. So it has a massive positive economic benefit for the local community. We're creating 267 jobs to date in lionfish management. And this only continues to grow as the programs continue. But as it's an established invasion, you do actually need to steadily continue to go back every few months. It's like weeding a garden. It never really stops. You just have to continue. And that's why a market-based solution in this case can be really helpful and really powerful, because as we all know, governments don't have unlimited budget to fight invasives. So this is a really great way to expand those budgets and really create investable opportunities to manage the invasive species. A little bit more about our team. We have our three founders, Arv, Roland, and Kahan, who unfortunately could not be here today, but they said to give their regards. And then we have some fabulous investors on board who help us, in addition to some of our VC investors, great partners in Conservation International who have helped us in our work with the lionfish, as well as Aura, Sustainable Oceans Alliance, and a variety of others who are focused more on just the ecosystem-wide impacts of invasive species. In terms of our advisors, we've really focused on connecting to the fashion industry. So we have, Pierre Denis, who's former CEO of Jimmy Choo, Bob Chavez from Hermes Americas, Alina Cho who's a Met Gala reporter, and then also Carrie Ellen Phillips from the PR firm BPC. So thank you guys so much again for having me here. And I think we're saving questions till a little bit later, but I'll be around if there's anything that pops up. But yeah, thank you so much, Lorena and NAISMA for having me.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That was fantastic. All right. And so our next presentation is by Mike Mitchell. Mike is the founder and CEO of Pezzy Pets, which transforms invasive fish species into eco-friendly pet treats. Drawing from his background as a fisheries researcher in the US and Mexico, Mike identified the ecological and economic challenges posed by species like the armored catfish, lionfish, and silver carp. In 2015, he began collaborating with local fishermen and chefs to create sustainable products, leading to the launch of Pezzy Pets in 2021. The company has since removed over 100 tons of invasive fish, supporting biodiversity restoration and providing fair wage employment in fishing communities. His presentation is called Untapped Potential, Turning Invasive Species into Pet Food. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us to present in person today, but he has sent a recording that will play for you now.
Untapped potential of using invasive species in pet food. Invasive species have been talked a lot about in human food, in restaurants, as well as other uses like fertilizer or even in fashion, but rarely do we talk about the potential that invasive species can have in pet food. So a little bit about Pezzy. Like I said, we're based in San Francisco, but we work with small-scale fishermen from across the US, Mexico, and the Caribbean to turn hated invasive fish species into clean label treats that pets love. So as of now, we work with the devilfish or armored catfish out of Mexico, lionfish out of the Caribbean, and the silver carp out of the US. And so we're working with both freshwater and marine environments. And even though we do manage our Pezzy brand, where we sell treats in stores, online, and so forth, we also manage a B2B component where we take these fish and we turn them into ingredients for other pet food companies. So a little bit about the problem. I'm sure you guys know a lot about invasive fish and invasive species in general already. We'd like to say that different fish, same problem. So roughly in general, these fish are accounting for up to 70% of the capture or even times of the biomass in the places that we operate. These fish, like the devilfish and lionfish, are found across North and Central America. And what they do is they outcompete native species, sometimes they even prey upon native species and juveniles or fingerlings. They destroy the native fisheries and ecosystems. In the case of the armored catfish or devilfish, for example, it's been known to cause a lot of soil erosion along riverbanks or lagoons and lakes and so forth. And in turn, it's destroyed rural economies. For example, I started working with the devilfish in 2014. By then, the devilfish had been around in southern Mexico for about 5 years. And fishermen had seen their earnings just plummet. So the source of income was literally turned off like a spigot. And as a result, many folks had to move out, move to the cities, move to other states, even immigrate to the US in search of employment. And a lot of the problems that we face processing these invasive fish are similar to what we've seen with other invasive species. So there's difficult unit economics, both with the capture as well as the processing, low yields with some of these fish, poor or just completely lacking processing infrastructure in a lot of these rural areas to produce a food grade product. And then cultural stigma. So sometimes people just don't want to eat the fish, they don't want to work with the fish, they want nothing to do with it. There's another anecdote out of Mexico where fishermen that were so distraught after just having their whole gill net fill with devilfish, sometimes they would cut off the lead sinkers and then just pour gasoline and light the rest of the net on fire because it wasn't worth spending the rest of their day taking out these devilfish out of the net. And so that's where we come in. My background is a fisheries researcher in Mexico, and so we designed PESI really to address these problems of processing these invasive species first and foremost. We look at it, even though, you know, obviously we do what we do for the environmental impact and helping mitigate the impact of these invasive species. I think first and foremost, we look at this as an economic problem. So we've developed these microprocessing models where we leave the majority of, or as much of the value of each animal as we can at a local level. So we work directly with these small cooperatives in places like Belize and Mexico to set up their own microprocessing facility and dehydrate the fish on site. And that takes care of a lot of cold chain issues that we might have in some of these places, or just lack of transportation options. So we have sent frozen product from I say middle of nowhere Mexico all the way to middle of nowhere Canada. It's possible, but it's stressful, it's expensive, it's really difficult, and so that's why we started dehydrating everything on site. And now if it takes a week or a month, it doesn't matter to us because the product can last for years. So yeah, we work directly with these cooperatives. We leave the majority of the earnings at that local level by focusing on these invasive fish species and creating a demand and a local economy around these species. We're able to target them, remove them, and help, you know, hopefully rebalance the ecosystem with the species diversity. There's been, again, anecdotes in places like Mexico, in places like in Belize, where we've had an impact removing so many of the devilfish or so many of the lionfish that we've seen a rebound, or even in some lagoons, we have to stop fishing because it's no longer profitable for us to fish devilfish in that lagoon, for example. And as we kind of can have an impact in these places, we can expand geographically because there is no shortage of these invasive fish and the problems they cause. Like I said, it's an economic problem first and foremost for us. And so we're creating dozens of new jobs, we're empowering these fishermen, and on average, these folks are earning 40% more than they did previously. And then of course, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide unique, healthy options for pets and pet parents. And so we focus on single ingredients, so just dehydrated fish. And of course, these are novel protein treats. I can guarantee that, you know, most folks have never had armored catfish or devilfish pet treats for their pet. So it's an excellent, healthy, hypoallergenic option for dogs and cats. A little bit more about our impact. Right now, as you can see down on the bottom, this is where we're operating in Mexico. The map is a little outdated, but we operate really heavily in the state of Tabasco, Chiapas, Quintana Roo is for lionfish a little bit. Like I said, we're working with approximately 25 fish processors, over 150 fishermen now throughout the region, and we've removed over 150 tons of this invasive fish to date. Here's a little deeper dive into our current and planned operations. So this is where we're focused. We're now with Kentucky with the silver carp, the state of Tabasco with devilfish, in Belize we're with lionfish, and we're looking to flip the switch on a new facility in Honduras as well. They call it the Rebel Reef in Tela, which is really cool. It's a reef that has been relatively resilient to climate change and other issues, but now they're facing the lionfish. So we're really excited to work with folks down there and hopefully build a robust economy around the lionfish in Honduras as well. Here's our product portfolio. So one thing to note too, all our packaging is 100% compostable in industrial facilities. Like I said, everything's single ingredient. This last one, fish maw at the end, that's a relatively new product that's been really exciting for us. It's chew made out of fish maw, the swim bladder in fish, and that falls into our goal as well of capturing as much value of each animal as possible. And by doing that, we can then afford to pay fishermen and processors even more and further incentivize the capture of these invasive species. So like I said, fish maw, super high in collagen. It's been a really fun chew that we've been selling well. With the lionfish, for example, a problem with lionfish selling to restaurants, as many of you know, you have to scuba dive and spear each one individually. So it's very costly and time consuming. And to capture the entire value of the animal, what we've been doing is we sell the dehydrated lionfish fillet. We took some of the skin and we turned those into treats as well that we sold as a limited edition product. We're helping another company turn the skin into leather. And then we actually even dehydrate the carcass, grind up the carcass into a fish flour that now we're selling to other pet companies to use in cookies and biscuits and stuff like that. And so instead of just focusing on one part of the animal and having to monetize off that, now by capturing more value from the entire animal, we can help build out that value chain. So a little bit about why pet food. I think as many of you probably already know, pets are the new kids. It's a huge market. It's continuing to grow really rapidly. And a lot of this growth in the last 5-10 years has been fueled by a lot of the humanization trends. So we're looking for single and limited ingredient treats and foods. There's an increasing emphasis on things like sustainability and social impact. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, exotic proteins. So we've seen everything from antelope and kangaroo and gator and everything to help mitigate pet allergies, as well as just unique proteins to keep pets excited and to spoil our fur babies. And so these are all things that we can provide in spades, and we're continuing to tap into this growing pet food market. So a little bit about what they're saying. We've been around for a few years. We continue to grow a presence online as well as in retail stores. We sell through Amazon, our website, through TikTok, which we've actually done really well just as a tool to tell our story and to talk about the kind of the behind the scenes and the processing and what we do. And then we sell in about 100 retail stores, mostly on the West Coast, a lot of independent pet stores. So here's a little bit about our team. We're a lean team of 3. So like I said, I'm Mike, fisheries background, mostly in Latin America. And then Francisco is our production manager, and Victor is our operations manager in Mexico. In the next 6 months or so, we're looking to expand our team both in Latin America, as well as having someone really lead the charge for sales in the US. And with that, I wrap up. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the invite to help share the PESI story and what we're doing, and to talk more about the untapped potential of turning invasive species into treats and pet food that our pets love. Thank you so much.
All right, that was fantastic. And again, unfortunately, Mike couldn't be with us here today, but I will be sending any questions that you have along to our speakers today, and I'll have them follow up after the event. All right, so we will move on to our next presenter now. We have Sydney Rodman here. Sydney is the founder and CEO of Green Revival, a company dedicated to transforming invasive plant species into valuable biomass for sustainable industries. Inspired by her early conservation work removing invasive plants from Lake George in upstate New York, Sydney recognized the inefficiencies in post-harvest practices and sought a solution to increase circular economy efficiency. With a degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from Rice University, she applies her expertise to streamline species identification and coordinate logistics for proprietary manufacturing. Green Revival aims to solve the invasive plant crisis and serve biomass buyers by providing reliable, local, and cost-effective plant feedstock. All right, Sydney, you may share your slides now.
Hi, my name is Sydney Rodman. I'm the founder of Green Revival. I'm a really big fan of our name. I think it says everything you need to know about the company. The goal is to revive the earth, to revive all the things that grow, and most of those are green things, plants. So I'm going to talk about what can be made, what Green Revival has been working on to take globally, and we're mostly doing work in the US, but we have some work outside as well. What we're doing and what I'm excited about of what types of plants are being used and what we're making them out of. As it is prophecy that resources will find new uses for resources during messianic times, and I think we're actually there. Okay. So yeah, just to say exactly where Green Revival is we have a supply problem where there's too many invasive plants growing, infesting, and when you have too much of something in your body, it's biology. If there's too much of something in your body, it could be a disease. There's something that needs to be gone. Same thing as in the earth. If there's something that's too much that shouldn't be there, that's also a problem. Disease and infestation in the earth is just like a disease in the body. And so what do we do with that? It's a little bit different than a human body, but there's a demand, and market-based solutions and free market solutions are really amazing, where we need to use biomass to make energy, chemicals, and materials. It's one of the most abundant things on this earth, above ground. And it's really important that we use our resources, especially the ones we have a lot of, for the highest purpose. And each plant has a purpose. Every piece of life has a purpose. And so if we ignore that as humans, we're ignoring our purpose to take care of the earth. Just a little bit more about me. I started out this company at 21 years old, and the idea came from I was a researcher in a lab discovering new species in the cenotes of Mexico with some cave divers, and I decided to take a summer job in Lake George removing invasive plants. Spent sometimes 5 hours underwater a day just removing the plants. Saw the amount of invasive, it's called Eurasian water milfoil, and I saw the amount there was, and that was it. Like, they had to remove it, and then the cycle was over, even though the cycle is using it. And so I saw a need, and I jumped in. So I was alluding to this before, but photosynthetic matter, mostly plants and other things too, are 80% of all living matter on the earth. And the global biomass market is $150 billion. And so, and yet all the stuff that humans make and what we interact with in the built world, it's more than all of the biomass. So, right, as we build things, how can we even more use our natural resources? And if we don't do anything, right, the alternative is not using, we get wildfires, we get extinctions, biodiversity collapse, allergies and tick disease, forever chemicals when the plants are sprayed, waterways that we can't drive our boats through. And in America, there's 40% of corn grown is for ethanol, and that's also a threat taking up our land. So, right, how can we replace this fuel standard as well, and use policy to make, because I'm based in DC, and so, like, how can we use our resources not just to prevent bad things from happening, but to replace bad policy and bad use of resources? So just to talk about specifically aquatic plants, $32 billion has been spent between 1975 and 2020. And so we're pouring money into taking care of the outcomes, billions, I think it's 150 billion or 250 for the LA wildfires. And we spend so much money reacting. And so if we can look beforehand, that's what we aim to do at Green Revival. So just to talk a little bit more about the impacts, there's a plant called Japanese barberry. It's been invading in places in Pennsylvania, and it's linked to increased tick disease and Lyme disease rates. So, right, people also care about not being sick. And so there's this interconnection between what happens on our land and also what happens in our body. The Hawaii wildfires in Maui were preventable, and the fuel was from non-native grasses. Even in the eastern US, there's predictions that with increased fuel, we'll have more wildfires, and we're starting to see that a little bit. Pollen allergies, some plants invade because they're able to reproduce, and that also affects what's in our atmosphere and our health again. And the plants, yeah, we know the effects, but yeah, farmland loss as well. And so whether you care about invasive plants or not, and no matter where in the world you are, you're probably impacted by the spread of invasive plants. And so the way I see what we can do is in the long-term management. We have policies to prevent, and we are actively preventing the spread of invasive plants, but there are places where there's acres and acres, hundreds of acres, thousands of acres, and it's not possible to eradicate in the short term, and it's possible in the long term. But the way I see it is that we have this symbiosis as humans with the plants that we have to constantly weed out. Even in a garden, the weeds always keep growing back. And so part of our role is to be part of this long term. In Florida, there's an estimated 8 million tons, over 1,000 plant species. It's a fifth of all of our land in America is estimated to be invaded by these plants. So it's everywhere, big impact, easily accessible, and it doesn't run away like invasive fish or snakes or animals, which makes it strategically easier to remove. Harder to locate though, because plants look alike. And so, yeah, some states have 43% of all their plants by mass are invasive. So huge, huge supply. Kudzu in the east covers, I mean, you see on the side of a road just covers of kudzu. And so I just want to talk about a project that I recently did about 6 months ago. I went to Djibouti in Africa, right next to Ethiopia, close to Yemen. And there's a plant called Prosopis juliflora, one of the 100 worst invasive species in the world, according to the IUCN. And this plant was originally planted to increase firewood amounts and help the people, except the plant isn't native there. It's native to South America, Mexico, Texas. And the plant has been causing droughts because it requires more water and has a really efficient root system. And so I've been helping a French client of mine figure out ways to monetize, whether that's biochar, bioplastics, and markets in East Africa. In America, it's right, some places the plants grow more, some places less. We have to constantly monitor. And in Green Revival, it's very funny. We specialize in America. That's where I'm located. And there's 4 corners with my name, Sydney. So that's our service region that we specialize in. But yeah, what we do at Green Revival is we figure out really how much invasive plants, what's the volume, where are they, what can it be used for, what species are best in in a land that has multiple, where can we get it, how can we also fight greenwashing, right? Companies say they're green, but invasive plants are much better and better for the environment than any other type of plant feedstock, which is usually agricultural waste and thinning forestry waste, which is also great to use and necessary. And then, yeah, we just figure out those health stakeholders, people that also care about the impacts. We're also making construction materials with a company that's a Johns Hopkins spinout, and hydrogen in Houston with a tree called the Chinese tallow tree, which is 23% of Houston's trees, which is crazy amount. And my next big goal with Green Revival is, so I'm an Orthodox Jew. I cover my hair because I'm married. We have a holiday called Sukkot. It's where we sleep, eat, and learn in a sukkah, which is a temporary dwelling to represent when the Jews left Egypt out of slavery. We camped in the desert for 40 years, and it represents like that redemption. And we hold a lulav or different tree species and shake it around. And part of the top of that sukkah of the temporary dwelling, you need to cover it with plants. So there's a really special deep opportunity that I'm looking to pursue there. and help, with indigenous populations, right? Jews are indigenous to a land. So it's very fulfilling. And the birthday of Green Revivals, I started it, is Tu B'Shvat, which is the Jewish New Year for the trees. So that's when the sap runs up the trees, represents renewal, right? We see, leaves falling, trees dying. That was what happens in the winter, if where you live has a winter. And there's a point, usually February, March, where we celebrate trees of life and revival, which is Green Revival. And I'll just end with saying, right, we look outside and we see trees mostly. We look in our house, in our homes, in our apartments, and the walls and the roofs and the floors are made of what the trees give us. And so right in front of us, whether you see an invasive plant or not, or if your eye isn't trained, the solution is right in front of you. The supply is right in front of us. And I hope that we can not only capitalize on this problem, but save many species from extinction and communities from the economic risks of doing nothing. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney, for that really inspiring presentation. We will put a link in the chat. We have it here now if people would like to learn more about Green Revival. So we'll move on to our next presentation here. So we'll now hear from Dr. Winslow Robinson, who's the founder of Fable Forestry, an organization dedicated to combating invasive forest pathogens in New England. Using drone technology, hyperspectral imaging, and behavioral science, he leads efforts for early detection and management of invasive species. He applies advanced tools to provide targeted control methods. Beyond forest health, Fable Forestry contributes to environmental sustainability by producing biochar, a carbon-negative byproduct of its invasive species management. Winslow's approach highlights how technology and conservation can work together to address ecological challenges effectively. And his presentation is Preconditions to Invasive Upcycling, Leveraging Behavioral Science and Design Thinking for Forest Health. All right, Winslow, you can share your slides.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tegan. So I'm moved so much by what everybody's doing out there. I connected with Lorena a few weeks ago. I had signed up to be a participant of this conversation, and when I shared my excitement about what she was doing and what everybody else was doing, I was thrilled that there was a spot available for me to tell you what I'm doing over here in Maine. So I'm just so stoked to be with you all today. There's so many connections and things I want to follow up about. The preconditions nature of this talk applies to approaching this problem at scale. So unlike others that have been doing some really very meaningful work in relationship to plants, the work that I'm going to be talking about is how we have a relationship to each other, how we have a relationship to the products that we're building, and where do we want those to go. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about this kind of thing. I live in Freeport, where I spend time flying a drone. We do a lot of rapid prototyping, and we apply behavioral science to small scale agriculture, where we grow healthy and delicious food on the farm. And I want to give you an overview of three interrelated, very important topics today, and how they actually can work together and in concert create products that might move the needle on some of these things that are important. So I spent a lot of time thinking about heuristics, how behavior works, and how these can influence human-centered design. I have a PhD in social work. And because we need biodiversity to deliver on the promise of a plate of food, I just want to demonstrate the relationships between these three things. So let's start with heuristics and what even they are. So they're essentially mental shortcuts that we take to make sense of a very complex world. And there's a whole body of literature about satisficing, which I encourage you to check out if that term seems curious. And this is a critical heuristic. It actually makes me think of Sydney's closing slide because it's similarly phrased. But what you see is all there is. Because invasive management is a human activity, all of these lessons apply. And if you think that this information is of interest to you, I'd recommend checking out this book by Dr. Daniel Kahneman. So the phenomenon of what you see is all there is essentially an illusion of certainty, because the brain doesn't always recognize its own information gaps. And that means that we can stop trying quite often pretty quickly in situations where we lack information to make a decision. And simply put, we just assert what we do know. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about what we don't know. And this can be problematic if you're trying to motivate people. And it's even trickier if you're trying to motivate many people around an issue. But there's good news. There's a recipe that I want to share with you today that helps people do what they already want to do. And I just want to reiterate that motivation and our efforts to influence or induce motivation, it's usually not a fruitful exercise. So I want to give you an example. So the Lone Star tick, which is pictured here at left, is known to transmit alpha-gal, which can trigger a red meat allergy. And the emerald ash borer is known to cost the US economy $1 billion each year, which also threatens indigenous cultural lifeways. And so if you think about what's most motivating, go ahead and take a minute to type in the chat which of these two you think are more motivating to people. And I'm going to watch the chat populate to see what people think. So far, most people have been saying ticks. There's 2 people that say ash borer. Yeah, so the vote is leaning towards ticks so far, and it's an interesting response. So I want to, yeah, somebody said no red meat, and that's kind of the thing that I wanted to bring up here. From what I'm seeing in the media, which is sort of a metric of what's important to people, accurate or otherwise, because ticks are more of a seen issue, they're getting more attention. And that is, I think, problematic. So what you see is all there is. And because I think that there's an opportunity to make EAB more seen, I want you all to think about what are some opportunities that you might think about through this talk as you're learning about these different recipes that we think we could apply to invasive species and invasive species management. Right, so now let's talk a little bit about how behavior works. I have the great pleasure of having learned directly from Dr. BJ Fogg at Stanford about his model of behavior, which is called the Fogg Behavior Method, or FBM. And it goes something like this. So for a behavior to occur, you need motivation, ability, and effective prompt to occur in the same moment. And motivation might be high or low, right? And there are natural swings in motivation, and these change with environmental context. So if you don't have a good night's sleep, or if you haven't had your morning coffee, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can consider weekday behaviors versus weekend behaviors. The motivation will be different then too. So motivation is slippery. It's mercurial and it can be unpredictable. And ability, or more accurately, it's actually perceived ability, is how easy or hard something seems to do. And it's made up of several subcategories like time, money, physical effort, non-routine, and so on. And then there's this prompt component. So if I deliver an effective prompt when motivation is sufficiently high, at the same moment when perceived ability is high, then the behavior occurs. And this action line, this green line, shows you where behaviors succeed and where above the line and fail below the line. So I want to give you an example. So let's say that I really like NAISMA, and I do. And in this moment, I'm very motivated by the mission. And when asked to donate, which is the prompt, $1 to NAISMA, I feel like $1 is a very reasonable amount. And so yes, I donate, my behavior occurs. Now, if I'm asked to donate $10,000, even if I'm just as motivated by the mission, all of a sudden that's much harder for me to do. So when asked, I say no. And the soap and secret here is that helping people to do something has more with perceived simplicity and effective prompts than it does motivation. So even at low levels of motivation, if you can make something seem easy enough to do and pair it with an effective prompt, then the desired behavior will occur. Okay, so here's how we're applying this work to upcycle brown-tailed moth winter webs into biochar. And if you're not familiar, just consider yourself very lucky. This is the brown-tailed moth in its caterpillar life stage. And let me just say, you do not want to come in contact with these things. Their toxic hairs persist in the environment for 3 or more years after they've died, and they're pretty nasty. So recently, there were over 50,000 acres infested in Maine. A little bit more about the caterpillar. Every winter web that we're targeting contains up to 400 caterpillars when they emerge. February is officially Brown-tail Awareness Month in Maine. And getting to them is really tricky because they live at the top of oak trees. And because they're hard to get to, we hired an elevated work platform and developed a custom shredding vacuum and installed the harsh conditions robotic arm with a depth camera. And we zapped a whole bunch of these using a vacuum chamber and through a HEPA filter. And even though I'm a commercial drone pilot, we could have done this work using a drone, but you just spend most of your time thinking a lot about battery and battery life. And we would rather spend our time learning about the tools and how they worked or did not work, and how we want to disprove some of our assumptions about this kit. So instead of spending time using drones, we spent time validating or devalidating a few of our ideas using this concept, which was really interesting. But that's not the important point here. I want to make the important point about behavior, right? So peak risk to humans is in the summer months. This is when caterpillars are molting and these toxic hairs are raining down from the sky. So this is the time actually for us to ask people if they're interested in the service. We don't have to worry about motivation. It's high. And that means that people are willing to pay for a service, even if they're early adopters. So when we asked during this window, many people signed up, and we were actually booked out in our first season. So then there's the harvest, right? And that occurs in February, and then the shoulder months. Having just removed nests from people's homes and given a report about the work, we asked them if they want us to return the next year. And motivation is high because the vibes are good. And if they had a good experience, they renew their service. So we're heading into this winter with already a lot of people renewing their service from last year. So that leads me to, how do you make something that has value and that hasn't existed before? And if you're not familiar with IDEO, I highly recommend it as an organization to get familiar with. They're truly excellent at what they do, and they help people walk through the process of prototyping. You prototype the hell out of the thing if you're trying to build something for the first time, and they've got a great catalog. So in the last few months, two things have happened that are making us expand our market. The brown-tailed moth population is dipping, which is great for public health, bad for business, but we'd prefer the public health. And there are also tariffs that many of us are experiencing that have been making drone purchases and overseas equipment kind of more difficult to access. So we've turned our attention to another invasive that's a precondition for something else that people are naturally motivated by, and that's avoiding Lyme disease. Again, I think back to Sydney's presentation. So the University of Maine recently got a $1.8 million grant to help weed out invasive forest plants, because those harbor ticks and white-footed mice that then carry ticks in our vectors, right? So here are then the preconditions for us, if I'm going to use what I've already been talking about so far. So we take this inspiration phase and we think about, what are people doing, and let's understand behavior. And this is where human behavior, I think it's really interesting. I pulled two images from the internet as quickly as I could, and I slapped them in here. The left one says, spent the morning pulling up as much Japanese barberry as I can. Invasive plants serve as a nursery for deer ticks. So this is a known thing, right, out there. And here's this gentleman, Chase, with a root puller and some Japanese barberry, and he's thrilled. And that looks awesome. This is going to require quite a lot of motivation to sustain, right? So in areas where we know that motivation is mercurial, which is everywhere, we think a lot about, how can we make these things easier to do? And one of the ways I think that we could do that is prototyping a design to find the types of plants that we know harbor ticks, and there are only a couple of them. And we think we can do it using robotic dogs. So here's a vision board of robotic dogs to find the invasive plants that harbor ticks. Their sensors are becoming increasingly advanced. We take delivery of our first one tomorrow, and then we'll be trying a number of different dragged fabrics on it to see which are going to aggregate ticks as they also go out and look for the invasive plants. I can talk about this all day. I find it very interesting. And this work has been made much easier by companies that can manufacture data to train AI models to give their robots the best chances to avoid false positives. So if we give the NVIDIA system some ground truth images of what barberry looks like, it can produce millions of data points in synthetic data sets and then train the AI on those models. And then so you get to sort of this last phase of the training, which is to get it out in the real world, and you think then about features, right? So let's say we've selected a dog that's going to work for our application. There are a number of fabrics that are indicated in the literature. If you go to our website and you look up ticks or literature, I think it's in the literature dropdown, you'll see we've done a lot of research into the different types of fabrics that best aggregate ticks. CO2 lures have been used to sort of have them organized in a specific place to make them easier to pick up. And then also, there's sensor fusion. So there's some images here of sort of co-locating real-time kinematics or RTK positioning of a drone or a robotic dog, whichever, it doesn't really matter, with some hyperspectral imaging and also LiDAR. So you get a really robust map of what's out there. And this is where I think it's headed for us, taking a stock robotic dog and being able to train it and maybe give it some nice PJs and give it something that not only not only is it going to be helping us look for the homes where a lot of these pathogens are proliferating, but also it's going to allow us to upcycle them. And upcycling is not even something I really talked about, but this is the mobile dumpster fire, which I lovingly refer to. It's a real product, and it allows you to put in biomass and get biochar right out the back. So this is the TLDR, right? I think if we're going to create new products that people know and love, we need to be thinking a lot about these human behavior elements. This is the process by which this is how it feels to do this work. And I know I'm not alone in any of it. 9 years ago, this was made public on YouTube. This is a tree species identification that you can actually walk through a forest. And it's a combination of hyperspectral data and LiDAR. And if you pan the mouse around, you can navigate this forest land, which I find amazing. And that's nearly a decade old. And 5 years ago, you could do EAB analyses from the air using a drone, using hyperspectral imagery. And this, I think, is one way possibly that we could make EAB a little bit more seen. And if it's more seen, I think that's the first step towards making a meaningful impact in this way. And we're stoked to be on the journey with all of you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. It's wonderful seeing all the different reactions, and we've had such a diverse variety of talks today, which is great. Okay, and now we are going to open it up for the Q&A. So I will invite our other speakers back online. And again, if anyone has additional questions, if you can put them into the Q&A box and include the speaker's name if possible, that would be great. I will be sending all of these questions out to the presenters after the event today as well. So if there isn't time to go through them all, we can do that as well. Looks like we have a couple for Sydney. So what type of things or products is the biomass being used for? And are there any specific uses for Eurasian water milfoil?
So one of our projects is hydrogen. So there's a public French company that is using hydrogen for EV charging. So that's more of an energy solution. We're also working to make construction materials, so like boards, when you board up a window during construction, or if, I know, I'm in DC, so there's a lot of vandalism. So I like, places where the windows are shattered, got to protect it so that no one can come into your business. Biochar as well. And then for Eurasian water milfoil, a big issue with the aquatic invasive plants is the water content. So you would basically be paying to move water if you don't let it dry. So that, in addition to using it, you also have to get rid of the water, and so it sits and rots a little bit. With Eurasian water milfoil, fertilizer, I know some companies that use it as fertilizer, and then there are solutions with Artisans of braiding the plant and making home decorations. Yeah, there's a lot of uses for it, but I think the most common ones are fertilizer and little consumer products.
Oh, that's great. Let's see here. And then with global supply chains, are there any examples of invasive species usage creating negative impacts on overharvest of these species in their native ranges? I don't know if anyone on here is able to answer that today.
Honestly, I can hop in and say, from our perspective, while we haven't heard of it, I think it's because we're still working on building the awareness and the demand for invasive. So I think down the line one day, like that's something we need to be cognizant of. But right now, like we're so far off of that for basically all species. Like the reason they're invasive and they're overly pervasive is that they don't have good economic incentives right now to actually facilitate their widespread removal. So there are instances where in their native ranges, they've just always been hunted. I know there's definitely species where that's the case. I don't remember specifics, but I've heard of that before. But I think right now, a lot of the time in generating the demand for invasives, like that's probably not what's going to drive it. It's especially given that we're taking it from ranges where they're so densely populated. Like it's not widespread enough knowing about the benefits of the products for the environment that there could be some kind of that incentive just isn't there yet. I think everyone on this call is working on getting it there, but I think as a society, the awareness is still pretty much lacking a lot of the time.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you saying that too. And we've had quite a few questions come up on this topic. I do have some sort of recommendations for invasive species managers engaging in this work as well that we'll be covering at the end of Summit, but I think you summed that up really nicely, so thank you. Let's see here, we have, so after you build a product design that harvests invasives extremely successfully, what keeps you from trying to sustain their population to support your business?
Within wildlife specifically, I think I put this into comment, but with the removals of like invasive animals, a lot of the time the people who are going and doing those removals are people whose livelihoods have been destroyed by invasives because there's no more native animals that they would usually be hunting. So what's really exciting about that management is that once you do actually manage the populations down, native wildlife bounces back and there's like opportunity for reintroduction. So those people can then return to hunting what they normally would have been. It's just, now like it's not harmful. So at least in the wildlife front, I think there's a natural balance that thankfully can kind of provide for normal incentives to return once the invasive incentives are gone from effective management.
Can I jump on that also? I think that the way that a behaviorist would approach that problem is, how do we help people do what they already want to do? So I think as the demands for every different type of product evolve, and I'm sure, Alivia, you've seen this also, what does the market want? Which is just a reflection of what's desired. And I think that, goes for any scale. If you're talking about different types of ink or different types of paper, how do we return to the things that we know we need to upcycle or that we want to upcycle? And then from my personal perspective and bias, it's how do we make those behaviors seem easier to do?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. It looks like there is another question for you, Winslow, in the Q&A that you might be able to type an answer to or a comment for you there. And another question for Alivia, has INVERSA considered working with invasive plants as well? They've seen some expensive micro leathers lately. And are there other ways of using invasive plant material for fashion? Do you think there's a market potential there?
Yeah, I mean, possibly down the line. I think we've seen the plant-based leathers really struggle to scale, specifically because they are kind of, as I mentioned, they're hard to integrate into the supply chain. So because there are so many animals out there, I think we would love to start with that. But I think kind of like the other folks on this call, we're really excited about the potential for invasive plant biomass in other industries. We found fashion because we think it's a good cross-cut and has a good, consumer on the other end who consistently wants something sustainable, and there's demand for it, especially in the luxury market, and there's a little bit less price sensitivity because like bags we've created have sold for like $10,000-$20,000, so it's a pretty high price range, which then opens up a lot more resources. But long term, I think there's for sure opportunities to use invasive fibers. It's maybe not in leather, but I think other sorts of materials are for sure a possibility.
No, that's great. Thank you.
So the final portion of our Invasive Upcycling Summit centers on the cultural and community dimensions of invasive species upcycling. Here, artisans, educators, and conservationists show us how craft and storytelling can deepen our connection to the land. From basketry to journalism, these practices blend ecological knowledge with heritage, helping communities turn challenges and opportunities for resilience. This section highlights how culture and conservation can reinforce one another in restoring ecosystems and traditions. So today, We'll start off with highlighting the Great Elephant Migration's groundbreaking upcycling work, removing the invasive Lantana camara from forests and transforming it into majestic, life-size elephant sculptures. This creative reuse restores wildlife habitat, sequesters carbon through biochar production, and supports indigenous livelihoods. Blending science, art, and community engagement, this effort offers a powerful model for conservation that harmonizes human needs with the survival of elephants. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Tarsh Thekaekara could not join us today, but we do have a brief video that we'd like to show to highlight this amazing work with the Great Elephant Migration.
We're now setting up 100 elephants along the beach at Newport. It's an amazing location. It's absolutely stunning to see the elephants by the beach. So I really encourage everyone to come and see the elephants around Newport. The elephants are made by a team of almost 200 indigenous people who live alongside these elephants and understand them intimately. So altogether, the project works on multiple fronts. It talks about human-wildlife coexistence. It provides indigenous people with a livelihood. It removes a dangerous invasive plant from the forest. So it's an exceptional set of things that have all come together to create this beautiful exhibition.
Amazing stuff. While Dr. Tarsh was not able to join us today, I'll read a little bit more about the work that he is doing with the Great Elephant Migration. The text is on the screen, but I shall read it for you as well. Dr. Tarsh is a conservation scientist from India's Nilgiri Hills, with a PhD in human-elephant interactions and a master's in biodiversity conservation and management. As the director of the Real Elephant Collective and trustee of the Schley Trust, Tarsh spearheads the Great Elephant Migration's groundbreaking upcycling work, removing the invasive Lantana camara from forests and transforming it into majestic, life-size elephant sculptures. This creative reuse restores wildlife habitat, sequesters carbon through biochar production, and supports indigenous livelihoods. Blending science, art, and community engagement, his work offers a powerful model for conservation that harmonizes human needs with the survival of elephants. You might have maybe heard of this exhibit sometime in the last year. They actually did a tour of the Great Elephant Migration across all of the US, which is really awesome. Unfortunately, the tour has ended, but there will be future opportunities to interact with the Great Elephant Migration. So definitely check out in the chat links to both the Great Elephant Migration's website and the Real Elephant Collective, which is a group that Tarsh leads. Now we're going to move on to our next speaker. So IvoRi is a wonderful fiber artist, geographer, farmer, and environmental educator from Clayton County, Georgia, and is founder of AfroAg. She centers Afro-Indigenous knowledge to reconnect communities with the land through sustainable agriculture, fiber arts, and environmental education. IvoRi's work prominently addresses invasive species like kudzu, offering workshops that explore their ecological impact while promoting creative reuse and stewardship. Through her programming, she inspires cultural resilience and a deeper understanding of local ecosystems, encouraging communities to transform environmental challenges into opportunities for renewal and connection. So thank you so much for being here, IvoRi, and for sharing your story.
Thank you very much. Hello, y'all. Good day. Shout out to Lorena for this introduction. Trying to make sure I'm in a quiet space. I will share my introduction in this good old background. Okay, hello, y'all. My name is IvoRi Schley. I'm here, co-founder of Afro Agriculture, LLC, and I am here to share a fantastic fiber art presentation. Hello again, I am IvoRi Schley, co-founder of Afro Agriculture, where we are based in both Greensboro, North Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia. Our mission is to offer opportunities of nature, arts, and self-sufficiency for historically disadvantaged communities. I am from Atlanta, and doing the best I can. I am an urban farmer in the Southwest Atlanta area. I have my undergrad in horticulture, plant science. I've been farming in Atlanta since 2020. So yeah, just COVID chronicles and all the becoming or just the urgence for like that resilient self-sufficiency. Seeing that firsthand. I'm a farmer. I am an environmental educator. I'm a geographer. And whenever I can on my free time, I am also a fiber artist. So that's enough about me. Okay, excellent. So yes, with undergrad horticulture, master's in geography, I think I have a unique scope of like that zoom in, zoom out, just the applications of plants, humans, plants and humans, and how that interaction unfolds into fiber art. So fiber art is a beautiful section of arts and crafts. I would define fiber art as any technique that manipulates plant material into something functional, or just very beautiful. And that can come in many faces. So fiber art is knitting, crocheting, sewing, like playing with those textiles. Fiber is a big deal. There's so much magic. I think plants hold a lot of magic, and fiber art is a way of unlocking that plant's potential. When we're talking about fiber art, that could just be a leaf, that could be the root, that could be a stem. It's very diverse, the ways we can use a plant. If we're talking about like international economies, you know, like textiles or just that agricultural processing piece that is very popular. I would say definitely countries like near the equator, because that's where like the coconuts, the banana trees are. Those are very multifunctional plant. And I think this example we see here, I want to say that it's a coconut, either like a coconut or like banana tree, but like the huge leaf. It looks like a woman is making a mat out of a simple leaf or two. And that's fantastic. So shout out to the plants, the bamboo, the hemp, and on it goes. So yes, just as fiber art is very important, just plants and humans interacting in general is a pretty big deal. And the way that plants influence cultures or vice versa, I would define that as ethnobotany. You know, if it's those cultures and plants, how are we affecting each other? There are green legends. These plants tell a story, even if they're in the background, even if they're on the table set. It's quite magical. So from the cattail, and just I guess a brief, what are we looking at, right? On the left hand, that is me. And I made a little cattail visor, you know, showing off. I've also taken a couple classes. That's my attempt for a pine needle basket. So again, I'm in Atlanta, we're in Muskogee land, you know, these are just local native resources in front of me all the time. Plants have personalities. Every plant has its own vibe. So shout out to my echinacea woman. And then yeah, there's just baskets as well. That's the English ivy basket on the far right, but we'll see that again. Okay, so shout out to kudzu. I can only imagine the beautiful range of stories y'all have heard or still about to hear of all of these invasive plants. But because this is a invasive impact situation, I wanted to emphasize kudzu and like the next slide as well. But yes, kudzu, these are kudzu baskets that I learned from the Nancy Basket. Shout out to Nancy Basket. I took a couple of her classes and definitely fell in love with the fiber art and all of the handmade one-of-a-kindness. From like the rim, the basic piece, we're looking at kudzu vines and raffia. So that's what we're looking at. And just like, I guess, the history piece, kudzu is an Asian plant. And so multi-diverse from the blossoms. The blossoms make lovely juices. You can put those blossoms in a beer. The root is very starchy. The root is used for a soup. I haven't tried it yet, but I've heard kudzu greens can be treated like collard greens. So, yeah, there's just, you know, just that multifunctionality, the essence of this plant. And the kudzu root can also serve as a like a tincture. I've heard people use the root as a tincture for like alcoholism. And yes, so being in Atlanta, English ivy is also very popular, commonplace as a landscaping plant, but also around in the forest. So yeah, English ivy is a great vine, and I've also used Chinese privet as like the rim of the baskets. So that's what we're looking at here, just the different stages of English ivy and privet manifesting. Excuse me. So yeah, there's a. I think we can go to the next slide, but just further echoing to imagine reading a plant's diary. There's so much. They have so much wisdom, each and every one of them. And from here we can move on to foraging, because how are we going to get all of these things, right? All of these wild natural materials. And this picture right here, this is one of my this was a summer camp at a public park. Wawa. I don't know if y'all are familiar with West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. I've partnered with them and helped with like farming, field trips, camps, things of that matter. Wawa stewards Bush Mountain, which is like a 26-acre public forest in Southwest Atlanta. And there's a whole bunch of English ivy right there, as you can tell. I think in that case, we were picking leaves to like make a soap. I've heard ivy can be used in that way as well. But that is maybe not exactly fiber art, but it's so multifunctional. That is the point. There's so many different ways to use one plant. And it's not just like a nuisance, right? There's plenty to go around. Foraging for soap, foraging for cordage, foraging for baskets, herb making, etc. Whenever we are foraging, we always want to be respectful to the plants, just thinking of just like mindful things to keep in mind. I think it's interesting in like foraging rules or proper protocol. That could be like a loaded conversation. Like, how's your land access? Is it private? Is it public? Just what's your purpose for like being in front of the land on the first place. But at least for myself, just a personal, like small scale artist, if you will, I always just take like samples of the plant. I never take the entire plant. But before I even take the samples, I talk to the plant. Everything is alive, and that is evident, but just as a farmer, just considering my background really bad, that's something I want to overemphasize. Personally, I really enjoy hammocking. Every time I hammock, I like to talk to the tree. Hey tree, I hope you're having a good day. You mind bearing some of my weight today, just for a little while? Talk out loud, because everybody's real and everyone's alive, and it's just nice to be like acknowledged, appreciated, just to be still and listen. So if I could share any foraging tip, it would be that. Just ask, and always say thank you. And there's just so much darn potential out there, again and again. Everyone knows like hemp, right? Hemp and all of those applications, but like nettle, stinging nettle, there's a lot of fiber in that stem. Banana leaf, but a banana peel, you can make it work with a banana peel. Flax is a plant that turns to linen, so it's just so abundant, and that's just more and more reasons to say thank you to nature. Hey, so I made a little video of that's cattail. That's cattail cordage in the corner. It's a brief minute, so I will pause talking. But that is a fresh cattail. Hopefully y'all get some of that. Fiber art is just so important to me. Like I said, fiber art is knitting and crocheting and So like, even if I'm just around family, friends, watching TV, more than likely I have some fiber art in the background. We're about to learn some fiber today. So Yeah, from a cordage, a fresh cord, or a dried, and then like re-wetted sometimes. Again, like just every plant has their own style. So just learning like what you want to get from the plant. When it's dried and then re-wetted, it's often like longer, like you can kind of stretch it out. And plant just for cords, the tension just varies. Again, based on the plant and like what are you using it for. So, I would happily recommend go out there and try things out. This picture we're looking at now, you see some snake plant cordage in the corner. There's also a young pine tree that like a fresh fallen pine tree after rain, before it's gotten extra barky, before it looks like snake skin or like a Hershey's bar. It's that skin is pretty soft. That bark has potential to be a bag. Wool felting, needle felting. I have friends, shout out to High Hog Farm. My friend Keisha Cameron is a shepherdess. So after she shears her sheep, she processes the sheep's wool to like yarn skein. So like you're seeing that in the corner, or like indigo dye. Or I don't know about y'all, I did like the little pot holder thing in art class in elementary school. So that's also what you're seeing. There's just such a beautiful variety of basket weaving, dyeing. These fibers are all around us. So hopefully this inspires you to go out there and start bending and twisting things as well. All right. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. That is again just the kudzu basket one more time. If you're interested in reaching out, you're welcome to contact me at my website, afroag.org. I'm on Instagram at afroagriculture, or I will happily receive emails too. So thank you for your time. I am complete.
Awesome. Thank you so much, IvoRi. Amazing, amazing work, IvoRi. And yes, please check out her website, afroag.org, and follow on Instagram, doing some really great work down in Atlanta. But now we're going to bop on over to Ayurella. Thank you so much for your patience there. Ayurella is an amazing journalist, which is a pretty unique perspective on this during this Invasive Upcycling Summit. She's an award-winning journalist and a nonfiction author of Devoured, and I actually have her book right here, Devoured, The Extraordinary Story of Kudzu, the Vine That Ate the South. So a wonderful continuation of this theme of doing this work in the American South. Based in Florida, she reports for the nonprofit newsroom Grist, covering climate change, food and agriculture. Published by the Louisiana State University Press, her book explores the ecological and cultural complexities of kudzu, including innovative upcycling efforts that transform one of the nation's most prolific invasive vines into useful materials. By highlighting both challenges and creative solutions, Ayurella offers a nuanced perspective on human relationships with invasive species and inspires new approaches to environmental stewardship in the American South.
First of all, thank you, Lorena, Tegan, and everyone for having me. Like Lorena said, I'm a staff writer at Grist. We're a national nonprofit newsroom that covers climate and the environment. And I also author Devoured, which published last spring by LSU Press. I'm really excited to share some of that story with you today. I have a short presentation, which now we can see has popped up, featuring beautiful images of kudzu, which you just heard a bit about. Thanks to IvoRi's excellent presentation. And I'm also going to be spotlighting the innovative work of a few of the many people I interviewed while reporting and researching for this book. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to share a little bit more about Devoured, just as a sort of backstory to this presentation. So really quickly, Devoured is a book about the past, present, and future of kudzu in the U.S. Again, IvoRi just talked about it a little bit. I think a lot of folks on this call probably know of kudzu, the vine that ate the South, this like infamous vine, widely considered the poster child of invasive plants in the U.S., specifically in the South. And Devoured follows the historical, cultural ascent and downfall of kudzu in the eyes of Southerners and many Americans. So the book chronicles how the vine went from a miraculous celebrity. It was this magical agricultural solution to soil erosion. There were fan clubs that inspired festivals in its honor. There were prolific media figureheads like Channing Cope that devoted their entire public platforms to basically preaching about kudzu as the best thing to happen to farming in the South since ever. And then in the matter of just a couple of years, that shifted very dramatically. Kudzu turned into this condemned monster, this thing that ate your crops and your land and swallowed up your farm and just became this terrible being lurking and haunting the countryside. And from then on, it would be referenced as a villain, as an antagonist in Southern culture, in poems, in movies, TV shows, and songs. And it remains a popular negative reference for something that is a nuisance, unwanted, that chokes the life out of you to this very day. So the book, it follows the surprising and innovative ways also that kudzu is being used by a network of very extraordinary people, in my humble opinion, across the South today. But also I want to mention just quickly that Devoured is also a story of belonging. It's a book that explores how the ways we talk about plants often spills over into how we talk about people in the US. It explores the powerful cultural dimensions of how we decide what plants belong in the landscapes around us and what don't. And then why this gets even more complicated, especially in an era of climate change, which we're seeing, ranges for plants are just shifting dramatically in response to our warming planet. And the species we used to consider native even are now suddenly being considered invasive. But to start us off, I'd like to introduce you to and focus on some of the key people in this book that are very much at the heart of the kudzu story here in the South. This is Beth Phillips. Meet Beth. These are some photos of Beth. You can see her here on the right. A photo on the left of some lamp bases that she upcycled from discarded, damaged lamps that had been disassembled and repurposed, that she actually added kudzu roots to. So Beth lives in Rogersville, Alabama. She's the founder and sole employee of Kudzu Mama Designs. It's a storefront that she operates out of her house, and she creates sculptures, light fixtures, dinnerware adornments like plate chargers, even fairy figurines using kudzu roots. And she sources her kudzu by going out and collecting the roots from a parcel of land owned by a friend close to her house. And that's where kudzu grows in basically unchecked abundance. She pulls the vines herself and then works with them while they're green. So first she dries them so they hold their form. She'll seal them in a protective layer of polyurethane that produces a shellac and evokes this like burnished finish, creating a color variation. And she'll source the rest of the items that she adorns her kudzu creations with from thrift shops, from everything from thrift shops to dumpsters. She finds a lot of like the light fixtures that she creates with are designed using old discarded lamps that she's found, taken apart, repurposed. And Beth is a lifelong Southerner. She was born in Tuscaloosa, raised in Tennessee, spent some time living in Atlanta, and now she's back in Alabama. She just has this really powerful story with kudzu, how she got started with creating it, how it saw her through really difficult chapters of her life personally, and then how she hopes her work with it inspires others to look twice at things we are told have no value. So I'm going to just read a really short excerpt from the book that I think really highlights Beth and a little bit of her story. For more than a decade, Beth Phillips has worked to embrace the promise of a wild harvested American plant with its own very unusual genesis, kudzu. Her story with kudzu dates back to 2009, when Phillips and her first husband settled in downtown Birmingham. Looking down onto their backyard in Southside was a sloping lot that connected to Alabama's Red Mountain, its forested shelves grazing the clouds, parts of which were enshrouded in blankets of a single plant. The Appalachian beauty that soared to meet the skyline above was crowned in wrenching kudzu. It was spilling down into the neighborhood, Beth said. The property was situated on a dead-end street, positioned right by the leafy hill. The kudzu was growing right up against the house. 3 and 4 at the time, her eldest daughter and son fixated on the beckoning plant that spiraled down into their backyard playground like a vertical bridge into another universe. That was all it took. Phillips began helping her children pull off leaves and gather roots to make wreaths out of kudzu. It wouldn't be long before the little ones lost interest in crafting with the plant, swapping their obsession with kudzu for another shiny new object of their affection. But their mother found she couldn't move on as swiftly. That first encounter, molding kudzu into something tangible, had lit a budding fire within, a pulsing desire that unfurled like a rhythm to carry forward, creating with it. It was there in her own backyard that the artist found a connection to the root of a plant that had dramatically melded to the exterior of her home. I'm gonna move on and tell you a little bit about Daryl and Tamara Wilson. So Daryl and Tamara are a couple that run Carolina Kudzu Crazy. They officially started the business in 2011. They incorporated it in 2017. They've been running it ever since. They use kudzu blossoms as the base of jams and sauces for barbecues and stir fries, and they largely sell across North Carolina. Sometimes you can find them at festivals across the South. Their products are also sold in a few local stores. And they're just this incredible powerhouse business duo. In order to get Carolina Kudzu Crazy off the ground, they had to face off against everything from the formidable kudzu bug to the state's Department of Agriculture and even the FDA. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with Beth and just read a quick excerpt from their chapter to give you a sneak peek of their story and their mission and what drives them to create with kudzu. Sneaking through the outskirts of Dobson, North Carolina, belts of one awe-inspiring weed blanket a plot of land the size of a football field. Every August, Tamara Wilson toils across the overgrown space along that rural North Carolina road. Day after day, she braves the oppressive heat and persistent threat of bee stings to fill bag after bag with kudzu blossoms, which she and her husband Daryl stockpile and use to make kudzu-based jams, sauces, and dressings. Back in 2011, the two had first embarked upon some at-home research to find more cost-effective ways to feed their amalgamation of hungry rabbits and pigs. It was then that the Wilsons first stumbled across mentions of the nutritional benefits embedded within just one of kudzu's trifoliate leaves. Curious to test that out for themselves, they collected some of the weed, which happened to engulf the edge of their property, and they they went out, filled up a bag, harvested for the rabbit, and then somehow Daryl Wilson, it piqued his interest. He came across an old cookbook with a kudzu jelly recipe in it, which led him and his wife to whip it up and give it a try. At first, they were not fans. The taste was sharp and fundamentally bitter, all shades of wrong. But the couple just couldn't ignore an instinctual feeling that they were onto something. That hunch is why they kept tinkering with recipes, a medley of flavors and ingredients, until they at last perfected the art of cooking with kudzu, producing everything from sweet to spicy glazes and jams based around the vine's blossoms. Then the world got in the way. And that's kind of my little cliffhanger for the rest of that chapter. IvoRi already mentioned her, but I want to talk a little bit about Nancy Baskett. She's a maverick in kudzu creations, and that's IvoRi and I had a fun connective talk earlier this week when we both found out we're both talking about Nancy Baskett in our presentations. But I interviewed Nancy Baskett for my book as well. She's an Indigenous kudzu enthusiast. She lives in Walhalla, South Carolina. And Nancy lives in a century-old house on a property that is completely blanketed in kudzu. It's incredible. There, she makes paper and baskets out of it, and then also teaches her community how to use it. So just like the others, I'm going to read a quick excerpt from the chapter that features Nancy's story. Baskett's bond with kudzu began in 1989 when she moved to South Carolina. Not long after her arrival in Walhalla, she happened upon news of a local kudzu festival. Already a seasoned basket maker, she'd been making them for about a decade by then. She found herself immediately intrigued, especially after hearing about the locals that would drag the plant down the street as they mocked it for existing. Outspoken derision like that, leveled at something that sprang from the land, roused the opposite feeling in Basket. She decided to try to build with the target of everyone else's disdain. Her first attempt at making a basket out of the vine led to a flimsy construct. Within 4 days, the item had fallen apart. The symbolic breaking down of the kudzu-based basket was a sign that could not be ignored. In Cherokee culture, protecting the natural world is sacred. Traditional ecological knowledge is different for every tribe, but all share a core responsibility to preserve natural resources. Native people worldwide have embraced the environment and fought to preserve it for thousands of years, not just for themselves or for their children or grandchildren, but for generations to come. According to Basket, storytelling plays a big part in that, passing on legends and finding new ones in the environment. It's just a matter of listening with your head and with your heart. These are lessons that she knew and held dear. I thought, oh my gosh, if I'm not going to put the stories into action and into my life, I'm not going to get any more stories, Basket said. She went back to the kudzu and addressed it directly. I'm sorry, Basket told the vine. I'm Northern. I go too fast. Please tell me how you want to be used. The towering patch of kudzu that's long been a staple of her life became a messenger, using the sounds of nature and its enchantment to answer her question. They said, leave the trees alone. Trees are entities worthy of respect to the Cherokee. They are considered powerful hosts, instrumental in the creation of the planet. Use us for paper instead. So she did. Paper made from kudzu leaves is now one of Basket's favorite things to forge, and incidentally one of her best-selling products at Kudzu Cabin Designs, which is a one-woman operation run out of her century-old house. The artist likes collecting newer plots of kudzu, green vines still in their first year of growth, to apply to some of her creations. In order to make her namesake, Basket cuts the vines into 3-foot sections and then splits them down the middle. Whether she's incorporating its elements like blossoms into a beverage or creating paper from its leaves, no part of the kudzu she collects ends up discarded. I use every single piece, she said. Some invasive species researchers give pause to this idea and the capitalistic inferno it could spark. If too many communities were to get on board with repurposing kudzu in ways that may lead to mass production, they warn it could quickly become a complication that fuels a whole other set of ecological and economic issues. But if you ask proponents like Basket, her long-term goal isn't to give birth to an industry steeped in cash windfalls from the vines. Her aims are a lot more low-key, and they involve making paper and art and teaching others how to embrace kudzu. Am I out to change the world? No, that's too big a job, she said. Can I affect the lives of the kids and the people that are drawn here? Yes, that's why I am open for business. Even at 70 years old, Basket has no plans to slow down her work with kudzu. The parables she tells with it are meant to be carried on, stories where humans revere the earth and its gifts. After all, the vine is still wrapped around the outside of her home, rows of large sheets of arresting leaves embracing the columns of her front porch, both spilling inside and trailing out to the waiting world beyond her doorstep. I'll work on it till my last breath, she said. So that's I think that's about all the time I have for the presentation. I do want to just quickly, I can kind of fly through the next couple of slides if you don't mind. Mimi Mamis, I didn't get a chance to talk much about her. She's an incredible chef based in Athens, Georgia. She makes everything from kudzu lemonade to kudzu creme brulee for her customers. And she has this beautiful personal story with kudzu that's one of grief and love and faith, and also like culinary experimentation. I interviewed Mimi a couple years ago when the book published. Unfortunately, the restaurant that she was selling kudzu lemonade in, Home.Made, did have to close its doors ever since I did have that interview with her. But she has moved on to working in another Athens restaurant, and I'm hopeful that she will bring back kudzu lemonade to in some iteration, because it's so delicious. And you can actually see here, she gave me permission for the book to share the recipe. So if you're ever interested in making your own cup of kudzu lemonade, it's pretty straightforward. All you need is a couple of pints, a pint of sugar, some water. Gotta know how to make a simple syrup, and lemonade too. But Mimi is one of the characters in the book that I think is really inspiring and exciting for those that are really interested in the eating invasive renaissance that we've really seen over the last decade. Will May and Frida Kurd, I also have a really fun chapter and focus of their story. They're basically a group of pioneering future scientists. It's Izzy Stewart, Seth Birdsong, Cole Kirkpatrick, Banks Roebuck, and Will May, and Frida Kurd was their science teacher. And they tried to see if they could germinate kudzu successfully in zero gravity. And I'm not going to tell you what happened with their experiment, except to say that they did end up sending the seeds to germinate in zero gravity at the International Space Station. But you're going to have to read the book to find out their results. Katie McDonald and Kyle Schumann were the first architects to ever build a home-based installation you can see here that was on display in Tennessee, made out of kudzu. And the next one is, waiting to see when the slide goes. Heather Coyner, former plant ecophysiologist that really produced some very groundbreaking research that challenged a lot of the preconceptions around how far kudzu's range actually can persist. Julius Thompson is an Atlanta-based author. He published a book called Killer Kudzu. It's like a horror that is based around, well, it's in the title, kudzu, kudzu hunting a town. And it's also a really, really powerful and smart commentary on race relations in the American South. And Julius, when I interviewed him for the book, also talked about how his experiences growing up as a Black man in the South, in Georgia, has a connection to how we talk about and view a plant like kudzu. If you know kudzu, you'll probably have heard of Dr. Kudzu. James Miller is the most, I think, preeminent and maybe has the most peer-reviewed papers published in English on kudzu, certainly on management techniques for kudzu. He's got a mountain of peer-reviewed and academic papers on different types of control strategies. And so James Miller is another person featured in the book. Tama Wong is a forager based in New Jersey, and she forages invasives and supplies them to fancy restaurants in New York. And she's an excellent person to also, if you're interested in the eating invasives movement that we've really seen kind of take off again in the last decade in the US. Lauren Bacchus, she is LB Bacchus. She runs Kudzu Culture. If you haven't heard of it, I would recommend checking it out. It is, I mentioned very briefly Channing Cope, and the book certainly, I go into like the history of Channing Cope and his very under the radar, incredible influence behind the US government incentivizing farmers to plant kudzu to deal with soil erosion in the 1900s. And Channing Cope was that prolific media figurehead that he talked about kudzu all the time. He published a book, Front Porch Farmer, that was focused around kudzu as this miracle solution to soil erosion. And he thought pretty much every farmer in the South should be growing kudzu. And he founded the Kudzu Club of America, which at its peak had 20,000 reported members. I talked to LB Bacchus, who runs Kudzu Culture, and in my book, I describe them as a modern day version of that fan club. They're not quite at the same peak in terms of 20,000 members, but there's a lot of support, and they're based in Nashville in North Carolina, and they host workshops and also work with the city and Department of Transportation to help folks in and across North Carolina and in the Asheville area work with kudzu, learn how to make things like baskets and beverages and brew different types of teas with kudzu. And so those are some of the characters in the story. I think I've run over a little bit. I'll just say really quickly, I also spoke with a doctor experimenting with an extract made out of kudzu in human clinical trials to treat binge drinking. He works at Harvard. And also researchers that study Channing Cope and people building other different types of home installations and using kudzu as a building material. And it's just fascinating. And I think is ultimately like a really interesting case study, not just to look at, as the poster child of invasive species in the South, but also to look at Southern culture throughout history with, and I will stop myself there. I think that, thank you so much for spending time with me in the book. I have a ton more. I'm always interested in talking about kudzu with folks. I think it has like a really twisted and mystifying cultural, historic, and scientific chapter in the US. If you want to reach out and do that, then I'd love to talk offline. But I'll turn it back to Lorena so we can get into the Q&A.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Ayurella. That was really awesome. Definitely check out the link in the chat to purchase Devoured if that is of interest. Highly recommend. And feel free to reach out to Ayurella if you have any other further questions. If anyone has any lingering questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap into our closing, but we might have a few questions pop up here. I'm sure as people are mulling over, people will definitely reach out. After the summit concludes, we will be in communication via email and we'll share like more resources to keep in touch with these amazing speakers. So definitely please message them questions if they arise after the summit concludes. But we will now move into our closing remarks. As we've seen throughout this past 4 hours, I feel like it flew by so quickly. Creativity is at the core of everything that we've seen today. And it's a powerful way to tell the story of invasive species and engaging communities. But for artists and conservationists working with these invasive materials, it's essential to connect with invasive species experts, understand the permitting requirements where you live, and ensure that your work doesn't inadvertently aid the spread of invasive species. As many of our panelists have discussed, Invasive Impact Initiatives. We do serve as a hub for these invasive upcycling resources. So definitely check us out on our website at invasiveimpact.org and on different socials, because we'll definitely be highlighting more of these amazing upcyclers via our platforms. We want to make sure that you can connect with invasive and conservation experts and organizations like NAISMA to guide your work in this really amazing, innovative, invasive upcycling initiatives. By practicing safe handling and grounding your projects in good science, you can inspire change while protecting the places and species that we care about. So these are, just in a quick summary, some quick tips as you might embark on your own invasive upcycling journeys. But Tegan, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Lorena. And I want to firstly thank all of our speakers today and also mention that we have recorded today's summit and we will be making it available on our YouTube channel, probably late sometime next week, for those of you that might have missed anything. But at NAISMA, our mission is to empower invasive species management across North America. And so for managers, that means ensuring creative partnerships like the ones highlighted today strengthen rather than complicate our management objectives. And so I wanted to highlight some of these recommendations from this paper by Pascoe and Goldberg from 2014. But remember that before integrating upcycling into a program, you want to make sure you have a really clear management plan, that you weigh the real costs, and that you really know your species, understand the risks, the population dynamics, and how to safely handle it. Anticipate outcomes and watch for any unintended ecological impacts. Try to pair removals with restoration whenever possible, and then be really good about communicating your goals clearly. And so we also want to express our deep appreciation to everyone who attended this summit and to our speakers for sharing their stories and experiences. The creativity and commitment you've brought to this conversation demonstrate how powerful art, innovation, and community engagement can be in raising awareness about invasive species. Upcycling is another valuable tool in the management toolbox, and we hope today's summit has inspired invasive species managers to explore more creative partnerships that raise awareness, engage communities, and keep our ecosystems protected. And lastly, since this is the inaugural Invasive Upcycling Summit, we'd very much appreciate your feedback. And so we have a QR code for a survey. You can scan that. We'll also send this out in an email after the event as well. But we'd love your feedback to know how we can improve this event. Hopefully this becomes something that we can do every year. But again, just thank you, everyone. This has been a really exciting day, and I'm glad that we could put this on together. So thank you.
Amazing. Yes. And also just quickly, thank you, Tegan, so much. I feel like this all came together so well. And thank you to all the presenters and everyone who's here, and really excited to keep in touch and do this again next year. That'll be really awesome.
I think that would be great. And we're getting some great reactions and great feedback. So hopefully everyone got that survey link, and we're closing right on time. So well done. And yeah, wishing everyone a great rest of your day here. All right. Thank you.